So you go to CML. You've got something else coming up for you.
National GFOA.
Oh, yeah. You go. He anticipates 2.5% growth in 2026 and 1.8% in 2027. And then we have some Colorado and U.S. labor market indicators. So unemployment rates, U.S. is slightly higher than Colorado, and then same as well in terms of the employment growth, which is slow moving forward. Real U.S. household savings are declining. You can see this into 2026. Averages, and then where we are right now, looking at about 3.6%. And then credit card delinquencies are rising nationwide. So you can see credit card, student loan, auto. Over time, those have been increasing into 2026. And then additionally, real U.S. household savings are declining. Oops, did I go backwards? Sorry about that. And then inflation. So the 2% Fed target, we're significantly higher than that. And this was in January and February data. So even now in June, that's closer to between 4 and 5% in terms of inflation for the Denver area. And then nominal sales in the retail trade sector. So you can see here the U.S. is doing much better in terms of their retail tax and sales as compared to Colorado. And that's largely due to the state's employment contraction, again, slow growth and suppressed tourist activity, which I assume is due to drought and some other things. So a summary here in terms of Colorado economic growth, strong growth compared to the rest of the U.S. over the last 15 years. However, in the last few years, this growth has been slowing. Personal income is projected to increase in Colorado, and we continue to see consumption. However, confidence is down, debt and delinquencies are rising along with inflation. Property taxes, after years of continued growth, home prices are showing signs of stabilizing with much slower growth. And then in terms of retail sales, which is the largest percentage of our revenue, significant increase post-COVID, has gone flat or slightly negative in the last few years. And even optimistic forecasts only show slow growth, 2 to 3% over the next few years. So in terms of economic uncertainty, Our revenue projections for 2026 are conservative. There's still a lot of uncertainty, again, regarding prices, wages, and future consumption patterns. Recession risk is moderate, but again, that slow employment growth, high inflation, and rising household debt signal the economy is in a precarious position. And no one, including the city, can be certain of what will happen, and therefore we're being very cautious as we move forward in terms of our finances. So any questions on that kind of national Colorado piece? And we have Maddie and we have Mary Donovan with Insight, who's our investment advisor here, so they could jump in as well if they have any, if they want to add anything to any of your questions.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor. It's just noticing the, if I understand correctly, savings are dropping, but, and debt's going up. In Colorado in particular, is that why we're a little nervous? One of the big indicators?
Yeah, I mean, I think inflation's rising, employment growth has slowed, so I think there's just a concern, and then ultimately that affects consumption patterns, and that's, you know, our revenue source is sales tax, so that's just, it's a big concern. And I have to say, I've been continually surprised that we continue to consume the way we do between inflation and delinquencies and things like that, so it's, you know, is the reckoning coming? I don't know, but I don't know if you guys want to add anything.
No, I think spending patterns in general are not matching on a US basis, or for the most part, spending patterns are not matching what the expectations would be, and not matching what we would see given the economic climate. So to Heather's point, I think we anticipate at some point that has to come to a head. We just don't know when. I mean, I think folks have been saying there's going to be a recession, you know, pending for the last 2 years, and it just hasn't hit yet. So we just don't really know.
I was just making sure, because I believe the last time we spoke, this was what was happening.
Yep. Yeah, and again, I'm continually shocked that people are continue to consume the way
Yes.
they do. That's why I continue to think there's, so we'll see.
And the best way to brace for this is, you'll get to that, so.
Yeah. I mean, it's, you know, I think being conservative in our revenue and expenditure assumptions, I think, and then recognizing that, you know, but ultimately that affects programming and how you choose to spend your resources, so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilor Janela.
We recently had a reassessment in Boulder County, as in this year, or was that last year?
I was reassessed in 2025, and your 25 assessed value, and so taxes collected in the current fiscal year in 26. So the next one will be in 27, collection in 28.
So we'll be essentially property tax flat for the next.
Hopefully
Yeah.
flat.
There's some changes happening at the state level. They've been kind of ratcheting down some of the non-residential reassessment rates. So even if underlying property values stay the same, your assessed value is going to go down slightly. And then on a year-over-year basis, there are certain things that are reassessed every year. So like some personal property items, oil and gas, right, they're relatively small as a percentage of your overall assessed value, but technically there could be some change in those underlying values, but from an overall assessed value, I think you guys are assuming a slight reduction in AV, which is commensurate with what we would expect given what the state adjustments that we're seeing.
Are you going to talk more about the state adjustments that happen or that are happening?
I mean,
Because I think aren't there certain things that they're, you know, saying, certain use taxes, for example, they're not giving those to the municipalities, they're keeping them for themselves, for example?
We're talking a little bit more about
Okay.
when you talk about the retail marijuana.
Yeah, exactly.
all right, so, sorry, Emery.
Yeah, Anne Marie. Councilor Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Are there any Lafayette specifics that make that picture that you've just outlined different for Lafayette than it would be for the rest of the state? Like, do we have more retail or less than the average community? You know, tend to have high property values, you know, compared to the rest of the state. Are there things that would, I mean, you gave a state and national.
Yep.
But on a more micro level, with regard to Lafayette specifically, is there any difference? Or, I mean, maybe you haven't prepared that for tonight, and At some point, I'd love to see what makes us unique, economically, that might make us different than the rest of the state, either pro or con,
Yeah, so we're going to get into the city financial overview, get into more localized information, but yeah, I mean, certainly we have information, like, based on, clusters, industries, where we see, again, our majority of our revenue, those kinds of things, we can kind of summarize some specific information relative to that for you, for sure.
I think we can continue.
Okay, so city financial breakdown. So again, you have your enterprise funds versus your general government. So you have enterprise funds, which are, charges for service, more business-like. And then the general fund, which is tax-based and fees, and then some of our special revenue funds. So we are just about to complete our 2025 ACFR, which is, our audit. So, finalizing those end of year's numbers. So some information here. So sales and use tax comprise around 40% of our general government revenue. So that equated to about $31 million in 2025. That increase was largely driven by 9-mile revenue sharing, which started to occur in 2025. Building use tax and audit revenue. However, that building use tax and audit revenue are one-time revenue. So that really, if you remove those, percentage increases over previous years aren't as large. So the city expects a 1.5 increase in combined sales and use tax revenue in 2026 as compared to 2025 actuals, which is lower than projected inflation and reflects a drop in one-time revenue. So again, inflation is, playing a part in this as well in terms of how 1.5% could be great if your inflation's less, but it's not. So property tax summary. So property taxes comprise 18% of our general government revenue. Property tax declined in 2025 due to implementation of a new state law that Maddie just previously referred to. That was about $13.7 million in 2025. In terms of our 2026 and 2027 forecast, property tax is projected to decrease in 2026 and projected to decline again in 2027 to a lesser degree. Fees for service, they comprise 11% of our general government revenue, $8.2 million in 2025, and that was up about 40% compared to 2024. That increase is primarily related to administrative changes to enterprise funds to recover the costs of services provided by the general fund. So we're getting paid for the services from the enterprise funds, and we weren't doing that to the extent that we started to do that in 2025. And then for 2026 and 2027, those fees are expected to remain flat in 2026 with potential decrease in recreation fees due to rec center construction. And then general fund revenue and expenses by year. So general fund expenses have been greater than revenue for the past few years, which means we've utilized some fund balance. So the personnel and also personnel as a percentage of the total general fund expenses has increased by year. So as you can see in 2022, it was previously 57%, and in 2026 budget, it's 65%. So previously, in terms of compensation, we were addressing past competitive wage discrepancy in the last few years, while Lafayette benefits costs continue to rise. And then, so again, we have expenses greater than revenue, which is not a sustainable path. So to summarize, over the last 5 years, expenses have increased at a higher rate than revenue growth in the general fund, largely due to wage and benefit costs. Repair and maintenance of city facilities can no longer be deferred. We have multiple infrastructure needs throughout the city. Colorado revenue growth forecast for 2026 is 2.5%, for 2027, 1.8%. The city must continue to review expenses to be efficient and responsible in its use of available resources. And as revenue growth is declining, that leads to a structural imbalance, and the city must continue to seek revenue growth opportunities and diversification. So happy to take any questions.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor. Diversification, what does that look like just generally?
It just means, are there other revenue sources that we're not currently utilizing? Or, so that could be fees, that could be taxes, that could be all kinds of different things.
Are these known revenue sources, or are we looking into?
So I don't think we haven't looked in detail at anything in specific, but again, it's, depending on the uses in your city, there may be something that suggests you, maybe you have a lodging tax, maybe you don't, it's, or a head tax, or, so looking at different things, they may be appropriate, they may not, based on what kind of industry you have in the city, as well as if there are other fees or, it could be so many things, user fees, all kinds of things.
So it's kind of digging into the revenue sources or all of the activities that we're involved in to see if there's a fees or funds that we
Yeah.
could harness, repurpose.
Yeah, and to that point, I think it's also looking at our current revenue streams and saying, are they still, are those, whatever it was that you were addressing, is that still an issue? Is that still a reasonable opportunity to attract revenue, or has it changed? Is it different over time, and we need to relook at that? So it's kind of just continuing to look at opportunities out there.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions on this particular section? Councilor Freeland?
Do you mind going back 2 slides?
2 slides. Yes.
Right here. So the bright blue, what is that?
That's fund balance.
Fund balance. So we're using money to fill the gap.
Yeah, and I would say, and oftentimes that's used for one time. A lot of that is, and some of that is capital as well, specifically in the last few years. And then some is to address, like we said, past, wanted to make sure our wages were competitive and we were retaining our employees.
Yeah. But we've done it the last 4 years, including budgeting for 2026 as well. Smaller than
Yep.
23
Yep,
and
it's
24.
getting
It's getting smaller. That's
That's the
good.
goal. That's the goal. Yep.
Yeah, if you recall, 23 and 24, we had those major capital projects, including South Boulder Road and then the 119 and Arapahoe projects. And so
Yeah.
that was the larger ones where we did receive reimbursement later in the year. So that's where, CFO Balzer and I have been talking about, like, we really need to make that blue line and orange line up more so. So when we talk about what our projections are for this upcoming year, it's going to be very limited on any new ongoing, because we really, while it's appropriate to use it, there's nothing wrong with using the one time. It also doesn't allow for other capital projects if you're doing it, so it's that prioritization, so.
So help me understand the capital piece, because so we're gonna spend, and so our expenses are higher because we're spending, but we're getting paid back over time, basically.
In some of those projects,
Paying it
right?
down.
So in the 119th, that we received 25% from Erie and some from CDOT, so there's some reimbursements for it. But
Right.
largely, what
But
you like to do is build up those one-time reserves so you can draw them down for the
Right.
capital projects and then build them up. And so we had built them
Right.
up to a good point that in those 2 years, we felt like we could do
Right.
some of those major projects.
Right, understood. Wouldn't reimbursements, though, wouldn't that net out in the numbers throughout the year?
A lot of our reimbursements are after projects are completed.
Okay.
And so you see
Maybe
that.
it comes
Yeah, it can be
later.
multiple years
Could be
later.
multiple years
Yeah.
later.
Does that go back into the fund balance then?
Mhm, correct.
Okay.
It's like we're pre-funding it in a way, yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess all that makes sense, and, you can only show what you can show, right? Like, this is our expenses for the year, this is our revenues. But I guess I'm struggling to understand, like, you say there's a structural problem too, right? Of revenues not keeping up with expenses, right?
Right, I mean, and if you continue to, for example, as you look at your positions, those things that, compound over time and wages increase and those kinds
Yeah.
of things. So it's really that one time versus ongoing and, determining what's sustainable long-term.
Right.
Because, if the line's crossing, revenue and expense, that's structural, if you're just continuing
Right.
to do that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I guess my maybe request would be, right, when I see this, I'm worried. It makes me nervous, 4 years in a row especially. But it sounds like that's not the whole story. So like, help me understand the whole story so we know when you come to us and say this is a structural problem, how big is the structural problem?
Sure.
What are we gonna do to fix it, I guess, which I know we're not talking about today. This is just giving us the outlook. So totally, but
Yep.
just speaking for the future, where I think this is a thread that our community will appreciate us pulling on,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah, I mean, high level, CFO Balzer touched on it, is that, right, if our revenue growth is projected, even at the state or ours, by 1.2, and inflation's 4, that's structural,
Yep.
right, in a very simple term. And so that's what we're trying to adjust, is really looking at,
Yep.
are there reductions we need to make? Do we just need to be tighter? And how long does that
Yeah.
literal structural deficit apply to us in the future?
Yeah, if you, if your inflation rate is at 4 and 5.
Yep.
And your revenue growth is at 2, or your wage and benefit cost year over year is 4 to 6% increase. So
Yeah.
so some of those are literally, there's a lot of, that we don't control. But so recognizing that, and then, looking at the budget in light of that. And we'll just continue to do that as we move forward.
Because obviously, sales tax maybe tracks with inflation, sort of, but not
Yeah.
necessarily, because we're not, it might increase, certain parts increase at different rates.
Yeah, I mean, good, bad news, we all have to fill up our cars and we all have to eat food. And so, those are higher costs, but at the
Yeah.
same time, people will continue to consume those things. But at the same time, if you have less discretionary income, and we have businesses, we're relying on that sales tax for, that's where that consumption piece is in discretionary income and that
Yeah.
we're concerned about.
Do we have a percentage of our annual budget that we keep in fund balance?
Well,
Yeah, what's our reserve?
We
We have
keep-
a reserve
yeah,
policy, right?
25%.
Well, 25, yeah,
25%.
yeah. And I think the Tabor requirement is at
3.
Okay, yeah, it's really tiny, but yeah, so 25%.
And are we still there, even though?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's,
yes.
the light blue does not touch that 25% at all.
Okay.
It's the
Yeah.
above and
Yeah,
beyond.
when we, typically
above,
when we
yeah.
talk about fund balance, it's assuming you have the 25% and it's above the 25%.
We're only allowing ourselves to do that, I'm just repeating this back, we're only allowing ourselves to do that if we are meeting that 25%.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
And you also
Appreciate that answer.
typically assume you want some minimal level of fund balance. But we have that conversation all the time. It's not anywhere, but, how low is low, so,
Yeah,
yeah, for sure.
thank you very much.
Yep.
Counselor Jensen, I saw your hand up.
Thank you. I know we've been trying to get our payments to staff more competitive, and we've been doing that since when?
Gosh, we started the compensation study probably in '24. So the last couple years, I think '25 is when we implemented a large majority of it.
And is there a place when we would feel we are there? Or are we just going up indefinitely? How do we know
Yeah.
when we have reached that?
Yeah, so since it's been a couple years, we're benchmarking. Other communities kind of see if we've fallen out of whack in the last couple of years, and by and large, we really haven't. And so we do monitor kind of certain positions increase at a rapid pace, and so we always do equity adjustments where appropriate. But by and large, any sort of increases from here on out, unless we start to see we're out of whack with our agreed upon market, will just be based upon those merits, the performance-based increases, not just general increases.
We don't have inflationary increases every year?
We do not. Some cities do. We traditionally haven't.
Like a CPI increase, we don't do that.
Okay. And then it's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we have a better healthcare system benefit than most communities, which has to be expensive.
Okay.
And I'm not suggesting we decrease it, I just want to understand.
We are. So,
Okay.
yeah.
I just want to understand it better and how it contributes
Yeah.
to our budget. So if you could
Yeah.
opine on that,
Sure.
that'd be great.
And I shouldn't say decreasing it, but, part of our classification and compensation study is to be, at our relative market. And so we did a lot of work at salaries that were below market and got salaries up to it. What we have found is that conversely, our benefit package is above market. And so because it is so costly and because healthcare in general has been high single digits, usually double digits, that's not sustainable as well when we're looking at that. So we convened a group of employees that volunteered to participate in a kind of roundtable session. I think there were about 6 of them with our broker and our HR department to talk about different options that they would be willing to support and maybe not agree upon. And so we'll be proposing that during this budget to hopefully bring our healthcare costs this year. We're hoping to 0 by making some plan adjustments that are actually more in line with what our market is seeing as well.
You mean increases to zero, not no healthcare costs?
We're hoping that there's no increase to healthcare this
Okay.
year based upon plan changes that we make.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Counselor Bowler?
Thank you, Mayor. Stay healthy is the message I heard. Just to sort of pull on the thread from Councilor Fridland and Councilor Jensen, I'm wondering if you can help me benchmark, so I see for the 2026 budget, personnel costs 65%. How does that compare with peer municipalities?
I say, we actually had a thread about this with municipality. It's between 60 and 70, 75. Mind you, this is the general fund, so it looks a lot different in like an enterprise fund where there's major capital projects going on, like the water projects and stuff, but
It's pretty typical.
yeah.
Great. And then, and I recognize this is very difficult to answer, but in your earlier presentation, you were talking about low consumer confidence and that being quite down, while at the same time, we're seeing a fair amount of spending, which is a little odd.
Yep.
And I've been reading, and I know that problem is kind of widespread in the country. What happens if that stops abruptly? What occurs with our sales tax and our revenue generation if, God forbid, the recession does hit, or people do say, oh, actually, gas is $5 a gallon, I'm not. What happens?
Well, so we're always, every month we look at our collections and we kind of continue to consistently updating our revenue projections. And so if we start to see a month, 2 month, 3 months in decline and it's getting serious, then we're gonna, obviously we'll be talking with Katie and the city manager's office and ultimately I assume yourselves about, so what does that mean? What does that look like? What does the future look like? What does that mean in terms of your current budget, projected budget, and services and staff? So, those are really hard discussions and hopefully, but again, it also, you also have to give it time to level out sometimes too. And so sometimes you get spikes. And so that's the issue too is, to be watching it and managing it. And I think that's, just in terms of the budget in general is, we're getting better all the time at consistently looking and reviewing our data to make sure, are we meeting our projections? Are we not? Is it better than expected or not? So I think, that's something we're consistently working on.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Counselor Gianella?
Thank you. We've talked some in the past couple of council meetings about fee increases. And I think some of those fee increases will go towards personnel costs. In that, for example, fees at like the golf course might cover golf personnel, which normally are funded out of the general fund, as I understand it. No?
Not with that example.
Maybe
Golf
that's a
course is
bad
an
example.
enterprise fund. So let's take the one that we just did with our right-of-way permits, right? So
That's the one I'm thinking of.
yeah, so like our public works staff processes the right-of-way permits. They cost, I'm going to use weird numbers, $10 to do it, right, of their staff time. We had been charging $2. So the rest has been subsidized by that sales tax. So the fee increases aren't necessarily to fund new staff, it's just to literally cover the existing cost of our staff, which is
Yep.
why it's been really prudent that we try to analyze these on a more frequent basis than we probably had in the past. So that would be the example. for
I
us to
imagine
do.
that's just a tiny sliver ultimately out of the overall budget. So I'm not sure we would necessarily be able to really identify that on a plot like this. Yeah.
Counselor Johnson?
Thank you. In thinking about some future proposed developments, I was doing a little bit of homework into what other cities do at trying to encourage buy local and whether that could have an impact on our revenue streams in the future, especially if it's a big construction project and we're talking about aggregates or lumber or things that have a lot of value. And I wondered, have we ever considered any incentives to, I was thinking about construction, but then I was thinking could be everything, office supplies, what could we do to increase our sales tax by some sort of programs to encourage buying locally?
Yeah, I had not heard of those ideas before, so you brought it up a little bit recently, so we're looking into
Okay.
kind of how other cities have structured it and what that means. With a town kind of our size without a huge industrial, like what's the impact and how what fruit will we actually get out of it, but it's an interesting concept. for
Well,
sure.
and one part might be marketing, but another part might be, especially for a construction project, you could maybe reduce permit fees or something in order to increase sales tax from, and it'd have to be a net plus for us to make it make sense, but there may be things like that we could do to get people to buy locally that would help us. So and I'd be happy to work on that if anybody wants, if we get there.
Great. I think we're ready for the next section.
If I could address real quick, because I fibbed to Councilor Gianola, because we are also doing budget meetings this entire week. So we discussed this in a budget meeting, and it wasn't in this presentation. But yes, so something like the marijuana state tax that they removed, we received about $60,000 from it in the past. So again, as we all know this, but as the legislature continues to refine their budget, which they also have to balance, it can have negative impacts, and some are large. 60,000 in the grand scheme isn't a lot, but it just is can be death by 1,000 cuts when you start to talk property tax I know they're talking a lot about transportation fees and all that, so that was one that I said we were going to present and we did not, so I apologize.
Yeah, and like the HUTF funds, that's been decreasing potentially in the past. So again, that's what we continue to monitor, and then when we do the projections for the next year in the budget, we try to think about those things and take that into account as we do our projections.
Can I just follow up related to HUTF? I know as we have electric vehicles, there's been conversation at the legislature about making sure we compensate for the increase in electric vehicles by fees on that. Do you feel that has been done, or is there more work to be done to make sure that electric vehicles are paying their fair share of road usage?
I don't know the answer to that question. So something we'll have to.
And it may be something we work on with CML or other groups, to do this, but I know HUTF is a really important part of the road revenue, and if that is decreasing because of electric vehicles, we need to figure out some way to, compensate for that.
Yeah, we got a new proportionality assignment in addition to HUTF, I know, a couple of years ago, and I don't know if that has been decreased over the years, through the millions of cuts, through little slices. But yeah, but we can look into it. and see.
Mayor Pro Tem, did you have a question?
I did. I'll finish. I was just going to ask the orders of magnitude that we're talking about, and with the HUTF and trying to deal with the difference between electric vehicles. There's also hybrid in there, so it gets really dicey to try and assign fees to that process. So I'll be amazed if they can figure out how to do that. Or how about reducing all vehicle miles, dramatically. But yeah, I'd love to see if CML can manage that one. But I'm just wondering if the order of magnitude that we're talking about, as we see the state's budget shortfalls impacting us now, which was not, we knew it was coming. I'm trying to not use the metaphor by squeezing blood from a turnip, but if we get more efficient, how long can we go by being more efficient versus looking at another source of revenue? Is that something that we need to, something larger? Should council be thinking about, if this goes on for another year, we need to think big? And I heard that we're going to talk about policy a little bit. Is that something you're going to advise us on?
Yeah, although again, it's not necessarily about revenue generation, but yeah, a couple of policy considerations, so, yeah. Is that it? All right, I think I'm handing it over to.
Okay, we're shifting gears a little bit here, so thank you, Heather. All right, I'm going to provide a capital bond project implementation update for City Council. So we have an adjusted project implementation kind of loose schedule here, and this shows you kind of the two phases here. If you recall, we broke the implementation into two phases, and we're starting this year in 2026 by phasing the first two projects, the Service Center Design and Construction and the BVRC design and engagement and construction. And so those projects are underway and kickoff has occurred. And we're looking at the BBRC for the design and engagement to happen. We were hoping for that to go through about April of 2027. It might be a little bit longer than that for the design engagement process, and then for construction to get started for that project. And for the service center, for us to be kind of moving forward at the beginning of 2027 with construction. And then the civic center, we won't be starting until 2027 with design for that process. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the team that we have been working to put together. These are very large projects. The first two projects that we're moving forward on are over $40 million of city taxpayer dollars that are going towards these significant projects. And so we're really happy to have a really solid team that we're working with, starting with Artaic, and they're our program and project management team. And we have Rob Taylor here tonight. I wanted to give him a minute to just talk a little bit about his experience and his team who's going to be working on this project. So Rob, you want to share a little bit about Artaic and yourself?
Thank you,
and
Megan.
Victoria and the team.
Yes, so thank you for having me here. My name's Rob Taylor, Project Director with Artaic Group. So yeah, we're called project managers, owners reps, program managers. Artaic's been around for about 15 years in Colorado. We've got 50 project managers, about 75% of them in Colorado. We do most work, K-12, hospitality, and of course municipal. I've personally come off Aspen Police Department, did the Edgewater Police Department, municipal, done lots of pools, lots of service buildings, and currently doing the Golden Police Department municipal building. Excited to work here with the city with Jeff and Melissa on the rec center. Sorry, Justin, Melissa on the rec center, Jeff on the service center, and you can see I'll be joined by my colleagues Victoria, and during construction, Brandon and Jasmine will be keeping an eye on things as we start in the field on site. I mean, our main role is, as you manage a very complicated city, our role is to manage these complex projects and make your life easier, and that's what we're here for.
Thank you, Rob. We're really excited to have Artaic on board, and just to share a little bit about kind of how the project management structure is going to go, because it is, as you can see, it's a long duration of time and two very complex projects that are going to impact the organization as well as the community at large. And we'll also have operations occurring at both facilities while these projects are going on. And so it's a lot of details to manage. And so we have this project management structure, and Artaic is kind of at the top, at the front end of that, and so they'll be helping to manage the two the project management teams here at the city. And so we have an executive team, and that's the team that includes the city manager's office, finance, public works, and community services, kind of leads in that part. And so we're working together with Rob on kind of, the oversight of the projects with his and Victoria's direction. And then we also have design review teams in each, the service center facility and the rec center facility. And that's the staff on site that really program out of those facilities. And so they're the folks that are there every day. They're operating out of the facilities. They know what the day-to-day operations look like, what their needs are. They know what the on-site needs are, the field staff, where the cars get parked, where all the heavy machinery goes, all of those pieces. And then, of course, we have the important piece there, as you come around the circle, the community input piece. And that's including the boards and commissions and public engagement. And that's really a significant piece of the BBRC project. But even with the service center project, there will be a community input or engagement process, because there are neighbors in that area, and also some, kind of private business in the area as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of coming up around the circle there and who our other partners are that we're working with and where we are with them. So the Bob Burger Recreation Center, with this project, we've decided to proceed with the design, and then we're going to go out for our construction contractor. So we started by doing an RFP for a design team. and issued a competitive process and got great responses, and decided to work with Davis Partnership Architects. And you all have approved this contract, and this team has already kicked off the project with us, and we have started to kind of move forward with refining some of the concept designs and getting to the place where we're ready to start community engagement. And so we're actually going to be launching a community survey this week, and we will have some in-person promotion, which will be starting really immediately, including at Bike to Work Day and then at Art Night Out. We'll be having stations at the BBRC, and then we'll have online promotion, do news flashes. Lafayette Listens, we're using that tool to capture the survey data, and so we'll be look for things pushed out on social media. Please pass this on, make sure that your neighbors and your friends and everyone in the community has a chance to provide input on what they would like to see at the rec center. We've kind of done some input through the first capital bond project, but we didn't really focus that. We were more focused on, here's kind of what we have for the capital bond and what's your feedback on bringing this to the voters. And so this is really focused on, what do you want to see at the rec center based on these kind of options at the aquatic center, and what do you want to see for kind of enhancements at fitness center and that kind of thing. Public forum, we'll have a public forum on Wednesday, July 22nd, which will really kick off kind of a week of engagement that'll be sort of multifaceted. And so that kickoff meeting will be an open house, and then we'll have a lot of input opportunities for people who kind of work out or go to the rec center for childcare or whatever it may be throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout every day, throughout the week. Okay, the Service Center Design Build team. For the Service Center project, we decided to do design build, which is to go out to bid for a design construction team. And we are bringing on board D2C Architects and BBD. This is an experienced team that has worked together on dozens of projects throughout Colorado. And they are going to be starting with a kind of preliminary confirmation of the program, because you might recall the conceptual designs for the service center were really very high level. We didn't really have a great sense of exactly what we need and what we were going to need to do to the existing site, if we needed an addition and that type of thing. So we're already starting with a lot of initial work with the programming to better understand what our needs are before we finalize the GMP, the guaranteed maximum price, to bring to council for the whole project. So this engagement is also kicking off. We're doing surveys and discussions with staff. Next week we'll be doing facility tours. This week we'll be begin doing a tour of the existing facility to understand workflows and processes. And then in the next couple weeks, we'll be touring similar facilities across the Front Range. So our operations teams can kind of see what they like, what would work better for them, what they feel is missing, and what we might want to strive for with our new facility. And then we'll be looking to kind of craft that future engagement and notification with the neighbors. So our final bond amount and issuance, if you recall, is a total debt issuance for $74 million with a debt repayment of 20 years. And at the time, the estimate was approximately $280 per household beginning in 2027. That's obviously fluctuates depending on what's going on with the average household price. But I'm going to turn it over to Maddie Pradanovich to talk a little bit more about bond issuance and what our process will be.
Sorry, and then, yeah, there you go. Thank you. Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Good evening. I am here just to provide an update. I know I was here not that long ago talking about a different matter. I'm back to talk about the bond and the projects. This is mostly an update from when I was here in January, which was sort of our first check-in post-election, to give you a little bit of an overview of what the issuance process might look like. We are, as was discussed in the last section, we are not quite ready to actually go issue the bonds just yet. So we will be back again. You can't get rid of me. But this is just kind of update of where we were from January until now and sort of what the preview will look like really going over the next 6 months or so. So as a reminder, the city voters authorized $74 million of general obligation debt to be issued at the election in November of 2025. We were not ready at the time to issue the bonds. The IRS has a rule that the city has to have a reasonable expectation to spend 85% of proceeds within 3 years from the date of issuance. So we want to be really intentional about when we actually issue the debt for a couple of reasons. One, to make sure that you're compliant with the IRS, but also there's no reason to borrow and have interest that you're paying when you're not actually needing the funds quite yet. And so that resolution to authorize the ballot question actually approved reimbursement provisions, if you'll recall, so that the city can be spending money on some of the things that Megan described, so some of those initial design costs and things like that, and be reimbursed with those bond proceeds when we actually go to issue those bonds later this year. Based on the progress in the chart that was showed previously, we anticipate issuing the first series of bonds for the rec center and the service center in October of this year. That's what we're targeting to kind of make sure you all get funds. Primarily, there were some questions about like reimbursements on capital projects. The same as here too. We would, if we can help it, we like to not lag over a fiscal year for that reimbursement, so it doesn't look a little wonky in your financial statement. So the goal is to for sure close on the first tranche before the end of this fiscal year. We're currently targeting October just to meet the anticipated ramp up in project costs at that time. While voters authorized that debt issuance, you all will be asked to approve an authorizing ordinance that actually allows the city to go and issue these bonds. I will be back to talk about that in September based on the current timeline, but from a high level perspective, it's what we call a parameters ordinance, and so it delegates to certain officials, primarily your city manager and chief financial officer, to actually enter into those obligations on behalf of the district, so long as we stay within the box of parameters. Those parameters are mostly driven, as you might imagine, by the parameters in the ballot question, right? So we had a maximum par amount, a maximum total repayment, and a maximum annual repayment amount. Those are really your key buckets of boxes that we need to check. There are a few other ones, but those are our key considerations that you'll see when that ordinance does come back in front of you. Based on planning, as of right now, we do anticipate issuing about $40 million later this year, so that'll get started on those first two projects. And then about a year later, we would anticipate issuing the remaining $34 million. That, if you kind of look at that prior chart and the anticipated construction timeline, that basically gets each series of bonds spent within those 3 years per issuance. I will say you can use those funds interchangeably between the two series. So just because we issue $40 million this year does not mean that $40 million can only be spent on the recreation center and the service center. It can also be spent on the new city hall facility. So as those costs start to be incurred prior to that second issuance, the city can utilize those funds rather than having to dip into reserves essentially temporarily and then reimburse yourselves later. So it does provide a lot of flexibility there as long as we're meeting the requirements within the ballot question of what those three projects. The city can really use either proceeds from either potential series here towards those projects. Our anticipated financing timeline, as I mentioned, so sitting here today, we expect to come back for first reading at that first meeting in September, and then second reading following 2 weeks thereafter. I think when I was here in January, we were thinking actually about coming in August, so this has shifted a little bit just as the city has gotten into the weeds a little bit more on the actual project design and timeline. We then anticipate going to actually issue the bonds, so price the bonds that first week of October, and then close a couple of weeks thereafter. That said, this is very much in flux depending on how the next few months go as far as the design work and some of that community feedback, and if the city is actually ready to issue along this timeline. What I will say is we likely would still come in September for the ordinance just to have that done, but we may not actually issue the bonds until, say, the end of October or beginning of November if that's when the city determines it actually needs proceeds in hand. That authorizing ordinance is good for 1 year upon adoption. The marketing documents I talked about a little bit last time. The one thing I know there have been some questions, I think, about the sale process. So We are anticipating using a competitive sale for these bonds that essentially looks like an auction is the easiest way to describe it. So what we say is on this date and time, this amount of debt is going to be issued by the city of Lafayette. This is the credit information. They can look to that preliminary official statement, which is the disclosure document, to get some of the information about your tax base and mill levies and those types of things, which are obviously the key credit fundamentals for repayment of the bonds themselves. It will also have information about the city's overall finances. So your conversation earlier this evening is relevant. Typically, we have a 5-year historical look back on the city's general fund. We have information about your fund balance in there, those types of things. That's really what both investors and the rating agencies look to as they're rating the city credit. These bonds will need their own rating. So the city does have an outstanding rating from S&P of AA+. We don't anticipate material changes in that rating, but we do have to actually go apply for another rating for these bonds, even though there is a rating out there that already exists. And then what will happen is underwriters or purchasers, essentially broker dealers, would be able to register to bid to purchase the bonds on the date that we select. That is a very anticlimactic process. Every time somebody watches one, they think there's a lot more going on there than there is. There's a lot of flurry of activity, basically 30 seconds before the sale closes. It's like eBay, right? You've got a lot of people like submitting right before you end your bid. And the entity that proposes with the lowest TAC, the lowest borrowing cost to the city, is the entity that is awarded the bonds. The type of firms that we typically see bid on this type of a transaction can range from kind of your Wall Street firms, so you think like Bank of America, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, all the way down to some of your more regional investment banks, so a Piper Sandler or a Stifel Nicolaus. And then what they do is they then go and actually sell the bonds. We don't have control over where those end up from an investor perspective. We are primarily focused on just getting you the lowest borrowing rate. A lot of times, depending on where, these are 20-year bonds that we're talking about, unlike your mortgage, where a bank is purchasing a 30-year mortgage and they get the whole thing. We sell municipal bonds typically in a serialized structure, meaning we sell a 1-year maturity, a 2-year maturity, a 3-year maturity. So then the purchaser can then actually go sell those individual maturities and even portions of those maturities to investors. We do see a lot of folks that have retail accounts in Colorado purchase competitive sales because there is not a ton of supply that comes out of the state of Colorado, particularly on the general obligation bond side of things. And there are a lot of retail investors that would like to hold those bonds. So we do see like a Morgan Stanley or a B of A who have entities within themselves that do a lot of retail money management. We typically do see them pretty active in the competitive sales space. We would anticipate, given the size of these transactions, something like this, if we were to go put this out to market next week, we probably would have like 12 firms bidding on the sale. It is obviously market dependent, so it's hard to say what exactly is going to happen the first week of October, assuming that stays our pricing date. But given the size of this and the credit, we would anticipate very strong market participation. And then just a reiteration, because you'll see these folks next time. These are the firms that are really involved in helping the city get through this process. So similar to how you hire consultants to help go and design and build these buildings, you hire a team of consultants essentially to help and actually get the money in your hands. So Hilltop is your municipal advisor. Butler Snow is your bond and disclosure counsel. They help prepare all the legal documents that we'll be coming back to you with in September. But also as a reminder, they helped in drafting that original ballot question that was approved last November. Your paying agent is U.S. Bank, so Heather is not sitting there cutting checks to all of the owners of your bonds. U.S. Bank, a financial institution, helps do that. And then the rating agency, again, is S&P, or that's who we anticipate using for this. And then the underwriter or purchaser, we will not know until that pricing date. Just a little bit on the market and where we sit today. While there has been a lot of news in the headlines since I was here last in January, the market candidly has not moved a ton. It is definitely a little bit volatile day to day because it depends on candidly what's happening in Iran overnight, essentially, and what's being announced as to what then happens the next day. Anything that sounds like, there's some reprieve on oil and gas prices means interest rates go down. Anytime that the opposite is happening, then rates are going up. But overall, the municipal market has been operating really efficiently over this period. While there is day-to-day movement certainly in the interest rate. We have had a lot of success selling bonds thus far this year. There's also a lot of investor demand. There's still a lot of demand for municipal bonds in general. So we don't anticipate any issues from an overall market perspective. That said, interest rates in general are very much subject to geopolitical announcements and whatever else is happening in the world these days. Looking back as to where we are today compared to the last 20 years, so the MMD municipal market data is a tax exempt yield curve. It is not publicly traded, so it is not very easy to find, unlike you can go into Google and type in Treasury yield curve and that'll, pop up what you're looking for. It's a little bit more challenging on the tax exempt side. So this is just historical data of, the highs and lows over the last 20 years. And then that red line is the average yield curve over that period. The black line, so just above that, is where we sit as of 2 weeks ago. So we are about 20 to 50 basis points higher than the historical average. That said, that averages are average, right? And so that does get driven down a bit by where we saw rates in 2020 and 2021, where we were borrowing for 30 years at a 2% interest rate. The highs that we usually look to is really the blue line at the top there, because some of those spikes are from post-2008 financial crisis, which are a bit of an anomaly, not to say that they can't happen. But in an ideal world, rates would come down a little bit before we actually go to market the bonds later this year. That said, we are currently estimating, based on current rates, the city's borrowing rate at about 4.17%. So still relatively low. That is on a tax-exempt basis. So for those of you that do have your own investments, comparable taxable rate is obviously going to be, we roughly say, about 100 basis points higher. The parameters we used for the ballot question itself, so that maximum annual total repayment number, used a 5% interest rate, so we have plenty of cushion under there. And again, the authorizing ordinance would just be something that allows the city to continue moving forward and actually issue the bonds. Our job is to make sure that we're working with your staff to ensure that you're actually getting to the market at the appropriate time and that we're comfortable with interest rates at that time and those anticipated financing results. And then I know this was highlighted in one of Megan's slides, but I did just want to reiterate, the city has not actually implemented the mill levy yet for this debt. So because we didn't issue bonds last year and we didn't anticipate issuing bonds until later this year, the city did not certify a mill levy for these bonds in 2025 for taxes paid in 2026. It will be certified this December, regardless of the timing of when we issue the bonds, because even if, let's say in a bizarre scenario, we end up not selling the bonds until January, we need revenue in 2027 to be able to pay that debt service. So there will be a mill levy certified this December for taxes to be paid in 2027 for these bonds. Any questions? And I will be back. I will say also, you can't get rid of me. If there are any things that, we'll obviously, when we come back in September, we'll talk a lot about the actual legal documents and the ordinance and things like that. If there are specific things that you would like to know more about that I either talked about this evening or in January and you want a little bit of a deeper dive, we can certainly prepare that for when we come back if I can't answer it off the top of my head this evening.
Great, thank you. I believe there's one more section, but are there any questions from council on this one? Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor. So the timing of this, I see it looks like things are stable, but could you mind putting that the spaghetti
this
graph of that one? Yes. So
Spaghetti graph. I like that.
sorry, was that unprofessional? This one. So we see COVID in there, right?
Yes.
That contraction. So I'm guessing it has to be something really complex to bring everything down, like what COVID did.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think what I always say when folks are asking, because we do have some clients that issued bonds in the 2020 and 2021 time period. You guys are actually one of them, but you don't ask this question. But we have folks that say, like, when are we borrowing at those rates again? And our response is never. Yeah. I mean, in an ideal world, yes. Would everybody love for rates to go down to that level again and people have, a 2.5% mortgage rate? Absolutely. Realistically, it's just not reasonable to assume that we're going to get there. I think, where we're borrowing in the, let's say a 4%-ish interest rate right now, what we would say on a historical average is we're maybe more in a 3 to 3.5% interest rate range, right? Probably like 3.5%. So we're a little bit above average. But to come down, I will also say, to come down 50 basis points is not that crazy. It just kind of depends on what's happening. We saw a decline in rates pretty meaningfully between the end of last year and beginning of this year before the Iran conflict started. And then we saw those rates go back up.
This is the setup. So 2008 is not on there,
Yes.
but 2008 was part of the impetus of the average market rate graph that you have after
Yes.
this.
Yes.
And you said there was a bounce on that graph that's still showing up. In here, we don't see that. What did?
Yeah, so you can kind of, you kind of have
If
to
we
draw
go back
parallel,
to-
but like if the top of these bars are 2008.
So where would that be? Where how far did we come down? So this starts in
A
2016.
lot. So you would,
We're way up there. Okay.
yeah,
And that's post recession.
yes.
When did the recession end? Generally, the 2008
I
one.
think a lot of folks would say like 2010, but it really is like a market reaction as to when things recovered, right? So there's always kind of like COVID, there's like a spike and then you have usually a trickle down of rates after that period. So the spike in interest rates, I'd have to go back and look, but typically in these yield curves, you would have seen that in 2008 when Lehman Brothers and everybody else, was running out of their offices with their boxes. And then it starts to kind of trickle back down through that period. And then candidly, by the time you get to 2016, these were actually really, where this graph starts, were actually pretty low rates on a historical basis. If you were to look back like 20 years from then.
Okay, so hypothetically, if we go into recession, recession tomorrow and we
Yeah.
bounce back in 2 years, that's right in the middle of us building these 3 structures, but we're not really going to be necessarily that impacted should that happen.
Yeah, I mean, the impact on interest rates from a recession is really dependent on what's causing the recession, right? I think part of the reason that we saw huge spikes in interest rates in 2008 was because everybody thought our financial institution was falling apart, right? Of just how things were rated what they weren't, or what they didn't actually reflect it, right? There was a real degradation in kind of the comfort in the financial markets systems. I think there's a difference if you look back also on a historical basis, if there's just what we're talking about right now from a recession standpoint. Granted, not everybody knows what's going on behind every curtain, right? So there could be something absolutely that comes out that is problematic. But sitting here today, this is just where we are and how we haven't hit a recession is a little unknown because we've been at this very high inflation rate for an extended period of time where we normally would see a decline in spending, right, that would cause kind of everything to slow down that we just haven't seen. And so in that instance, at times when you have an instance where then the Fed might be cutting rates to incentivize some economic activity, then we might actually see rates go down, right? So it's a little counterintuitive sometimes as to what we're seeing in the interest rate market relative to what's actually happening kind of in the overall global or U.S. economy.
So when we got your briefing before October 20th, when we actually we do the whatever.
Yes,
That.
yes.
You'll let us know how to reassure the public. Should there be something dramatic happening, you'll reassure us that
Yes,
there's
absolutely.
stability.
So
Okay.
what we'll do when we come back in September is kind of give you estimates as to, again, where we are at that point in time from an interest rate perspective. And then from a timing of the sale, we're never going to push the city into going through with a sale when we're not comfortable. And so, I guess a more recent example of this is kind of the fallout from tariffs and Liberation Day, a little over a year ago now. Is that, ironically, the conflict in Iran has not caused spikes in interest rates that we would have normally anticipated when you're talking about a war in the Middle East where oil and gas are impacted. Where we did see it was with the implementation of tariffs in April of 2025. And we saw interest rates go this, let's see if I can highlight it on here, like this here. Can you see my cursor? Yeah. Okay, that's Liberation Day. So we saw increases of like 30 basis points day over day for a week straight, basically. And And that is an instance where if that were happening, we would not go forward with the sale. Because from our perspective, we have no idea what underwriters are actually bidding to, right? We had a sale happening that week actually, and we pulled it from the market because there's no underlying, the yield curve is moving so much that nobody knows what they're actually pricing the bonds to, right? And so in that instance, we would say, nope, we're actually not going to hold the sale. Whether we pull everything down or we leave it out and we kind of see how things play out depends on what we actually think is happening at the time. And then we would continue to have conversations and then revisit going to market at a more appropriate time once we kind of handle the fallout from that, which that took about 2 or 3 weeks to kind of have everything settle. Bond deals were still happening in that period. It's more of a, when do you think we're going to kind of restabilize from an interest rate perspective?
Thank you.
Councilor Finland?
If I'm understanding correctly, I mean, we have, right, a cap of 5% written in. So we kind of
Yes.
have already built in constraints around ourselves. If it spikes above 5, which sounds like it's possible, but unlikely,
Yep.
we literally cannot do
Correct.
that.
Yes.
So we have that hard constraint as well. But maybe it goes lower and that's even better for us too.
And what I will say is, these bonds will be issued with a refinancing opportunity. So unlike your mortgage where you can go back to a bank at any time and refinance as many times as you want, we are a little bit more restricted in the issuance of tax exempt bonds just because of both investor demand, but also tax law, essentially. We can't refinance prior to typically about 10 years on a tax exempt basis, but we can refinance anytime thereafter. So, if we're issuing the bonds, yes, you are locked into that interest rate for a period of time, and then you would be able to refinance in the future to lower those interest costs, thereby lowering your mill levy. You potentially could do it in advance of that 10-year call option, but rates, you'd have to do it on a taxable basis, so rates would have to be very, very low. That said, we did see that in 2020 and 2021. So if we did end up back in that type of a interest rate environment, that would be an option.
Councilor Gianello?
Yeah, kind of on that same thread. I mean, what happens if we sell the bonds at 4%? What does that mean for the city? I don't quite fully understand how that works.
Sure. So, your maximum annual parameter right now is $6 million in your ballot question. If we actually end up issuing a slightly lower rate, it won't be $6 million. It might be 5.9 million or 5, right? So, and similarly on your total repayment costs, instead of $120 million of total repayment, it's 118 or what have you, right? So it really is, it dictates whatever we end up borrowing at is what dictates the mill levy essentially that gets set by the city because it impacts your debt service requirement.
So in that case, we would just set a lower mill levy
Yes.
for the next year and move on.
Yes.
Yep. That's great. Thank you. Oh, I had one more question just about that flexibility of timing in the bond auction. I know there's some notice requirements.
Yes.
Does that just mean if we decide we pull the plug, we got to redo the notice and
Yes.
all that
Yep.
again?
And it's really, there's not a whole lot that would change other than the date that we're saying we're selling the bonds on, to be honest. If we were talking about delaying months, then there's some information in the disclosure document that would need to be
Sure.
updated because that's now, would be
Underwriting
considered stale.
might have more to ask at that point.
But if it's truly just moving it 3 weeks because we hit some kind of market bump that we're not comfortable with, then yes, we just basically pull those down, we repost with the updated sale date and proceed as is.
Great. I think we're ready for the last section.
Okay. Back to Heather.
So in light of these bonds selling those and having those proceeds, there's a couple potential policy updates that our consultants have suggested this might be the right timing to do that. So one of those is our investment policy. So it establishes the objectives and constraints related to how the city's funds are to be managed. So this was last updated in 2018. Certain updates are recommended to streamline and clarify the language, remove antiquated references, and broaden guidelines to allow greater flexibility when investing. Proposed changes also include language referencing sustainability, and we've included that draft policy in your packet with highlights, with changes highlighted to look in more detail there. And then just to get a little more specific here, again, a couple of the specific objectives. Proposed language allows for considerations of the city's sustainability goals within the context of the objectives of safety, liquidity, yield, and diversification. And then in terms of Section 7, eligible investments and transactions, proposed language increases language to increase investment flexibility, again, related to the maturity limit for U.S. government securities and credit ratings required for corporate securities. So maybe in more lay terms, that means we're increasing our maturity limits for some investments in U.S. government securities beyond the current 5 years. And we're allowing additional flexibility for some investment in corporate securities with credit ratings of at least A- or the equivalent by at least 2 rating agencies at the time of purchase. So those are, again, allowing for additional flexibility in the investment policy. And then another update that we are looking at is to amend the purchasing procedures in the municipal code to allow the city manager to approve contracts consistent with annual budget approvals. So this allows contracts to move forward in a timely and efficient manner that aligns with previous budget approvals and purchasing guidelines, consistent with the city having a professional staff, an in-house city attorney's office, and a reduction in staff time to prepare ongoing purchasing requests and city council meeting time for formal approval processes. So those draft changes as well to the municipal code, section 5 and 54 are also included in your reading materials. And so just wanted to check in, see if you had any thoughts on that. I don't know, Katie, if you wanted to add anything or?
No, what I'll say about the purchasing procedures is, right now, they're $100,000 for city manager and then 10% change. And when we were talking with our consultants related to the bond, given these are $74 million projects and the timeliness that we have to move quickly with the 3 years and, 2 meetings a month, we reached out to other municipalities and a lot are actually moving towards that. You guys all approved the budget and therefore trust in that we have RFP processes, we have all of the, requirements. And so bringing it back to you just would add time. It's not a necessity, but it certainly would be prudent for the bond projects in particular.
Councilor Belair?
Thank you, Mayor. For what it's worth, I agree with that. I think $100,000 is not what it was 10 years ago. And to my mind, that really throws a lot of sand in the gears. But I would be curious what sort of dollar figure staff would recommend. Bringing it to council, 500,000, $1 million, $2 million. I'm curious what they think about that.
Yeah, in this proposal, if it's been approved by the budget, so no matter the dollar amount, it wouldn't need to go back to council for that approval because you've already approved the budget dollar amount.
Yeah, and I would just clarify that doesn't mean we don't go through all our purchasing requirements, bid requirements, all that. It's just the piece that comes to council.
Councilor Jensen?
Can you go back to the slide before? So my iPad's not working, so I can't hold this up right now. But in looking at this, in preparing, my memory is that we don't really do stocks. So when you say corporate securities, you're talking about bonds or we're not, okay. Just wanted to make sure I was clear about that. And then as a person who spent recently about 40 hours making changes in my own investment policy, it is very difficult to get to sustainability goals and trying to find entities to invest in that do that don't have some weird skeletons in their closet or things that you don't want to invest in. So I guess I'm looking at that language and going, it was really hard for me. How is it that we as a municipality intend to add sustainability goals, especially when we're talking about municipal bonds or government bonds, which aren't really, when you're talking about corporations, it's easier to look at their track record as a corporation. So I'm just wondering how this new language, I approve of it, but actualizing it seems like it could be very, very difficult.
Yeah, I'll start and I'm going to let Mary respond. She's our investment advisor as well. But, this is really an attempt to have us consider this in the consideration of our investments. It doesn't mean it's going to be the ultimate decision, and it's one of our objectives in light of all the other ones that
Right,
I
I
mentioned.
get it.
So that's kind
But
of
to be
the way.
useful,
Right.
that has to be grounded in some kind of reality about what you're investing in and how sustainable they are. And I'm wanting to know how you figure that out, how we are planning to figure that out, because I have found it very difficult myself.
It is, but I'll.
I agree. It's very difficult, for sure. So one thing that we can bring forward to you is the idea of assessing the firms. This would be for your corporate bonds, okay? So assessing the corporate bond issuers in the context of their environmental, social, and governance scores, okay? So Insight is an investment advisory firm. We're part of the Bank of New York. One of the services we provide is looking at corporate issuers and assigning to them a rating based upon those sorts of qualitative characteristics, their environmental, social, and governance scores. That rolls into an overall score as well. It's subjective, okay? It's subjective without question. But the way that I kind of got comfortable with the whole ESG thing was recognizing that an ESG score fundamentally is a way of looking at risk in a corporation, okay? Where is there risk? Is there risk for 3M because they sold certain earplugs? There is risk there, okay? The ESG scores would identify that as a risk, and you would say, is that something that we want to invest in? So with our ESG approach, we have a numerical process, and it's something that we can report to you on a continuing basis for the companies that you own. And our goal would simply be to try to buy the ones with the better scores, okay? Try to veer up on the ESG scores so that you're not going to the lower in-class rated corporations, okay? It's subjective, but it's a way to look at it, it's a way to recognize it and monitor it over time. And that's one of the ways that we work with clients on the ESG approach. Another way that we work with clients, and this would be something that would be more specific to the city of Lafayette, would be if you chose to put forth restricted issuers, okay? Like you said, we don't want to own any oil and gas. I pick on it, it's so simple, it's so easy to pick on, right? We don't want to own Exxon and we don't want to own Chevron, okay? That's okay. You can have restrictions on the issuers that you're willing to own in your portfolio. That would be typically something that would come from the client to us. We are happy to manage the portfolio to meet your goals, okay? The ESG scores are one way of doing it. Then you can also have these restrictions on particular firms or segments of the industries that you just frankly don't want to see in your portfolio, and that's okay.
And I love that, thank you. But practically, who in city government, would it be the Sustainability Advisory Board, the council? Who would be the one guiding you? Let's say we decided we don't want nuclear power, or, right, or something like that. What entity would be telling you, or do we review that periodically as a council? How does that work?
If I may respond?
Oh, of course.
I think this is very doable, and I'm very happy to hear this. And I don't know that we know enough to advise directly, but there are some pieces that our SRB would be able to generally comment on if there's a newer technology that nobody really understands, or a process like that. And I would hope that we would be able to ask them if there were a question, if you're weighing two different organizations, which one, if you dig down deeply enough, has a better track record. And it's not just sustainability, it's also resilience. Like, what is their history? If you look at Swiss Re, which is a reinsuring company, they've been doing this for years. They've been looking at what potentially they're investing in and what is the risk of the outcomes from that. So I don't think this is far off of what the city of Lafayette should be doing. And yeah, it's new, but I think I'm so glad to hear this.
But I'm just trying to figure out the process and how we will do this. And maybe the Sustainability Board will make a recommendation to council, but how often do you change those? If it's once a month, that might be difficult for us to stay on top of it? How will that work?
The guidelines are typically not changed frequently, okay? So at the inception of like embarking on an ESG type approach, it would probably be appropriate to consider if there are some of those sectors you're not interested in seeing, okay? Might be the oil and gas, it might be, firearms, might be, alcoholic beverages, this and stuff. These are sort of like typical areas that sometimes public investors don't want to see in their portfolios. We would look for some direction from the finance director through the council approval to guide us that way. And when we have that information at hand, it's tough, folks, because we can have a company, and I'll pick on another one, and I don't like to get political, but some portfolios would own like Caterpillar, and they might be uncomfortable with Caterpillar through the way that some of their machinery is used in ways that maybe it wasn't intended to be used. Okay, that gets into some pretty tricky stuff for your simple portfolio manager to dissect, okay? So we're gonna have to keep it kind of high level, come up with some broad restrictions that you're gonna be comfortable with, start monitoring the ESG scores, get used to it, see what it looks like, and you can refine it over time, without question. It's open for improvement over time.
Yeah, and the investment policy is really the opportunity to try to be as clear as you can so that as trades happen and things like that because we will be making decisions about whether, it fits this policy regulation based on these criteria, and yes, we can go forward with that trade. And we make those decisions
So
a couple
as
times a
I
year.
understand ESG, and I really have spent a lot of time on this.
Okay.
So it's not just environment, it's also governance and things
Social.
like discrimination in hiring and things like that. But our policy right now just says sustainability goals. So I guess for council to think about is, do we want those other goals like good governance and anti-discrimination practices, that kind of thing in that mix?
I would say that we could, for policy purposes, the general term like that,
ESG?
sustainability.
Oh,
Because if we start parsing out those individual bits and pieces, ultimately they do reflect upon how sustainable is your system. Discrimination is under that as far as policy goes. And I think if we parse it out, we might be missing some of the other things that we'd like to catch. If we try to delineate everything, that's problematic. I don't.
but how about using the ESG?
Well, I think that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, I think all of those are important, and that's the way the rating scale that she's gonna be bringing us work, so they look at all of those things. So I would say including all of them and not just sustainability would be a good way to go.
Yeah, and I think we're thinking too nitty-gritty on this. I think really we need to look at, we're setting the policy. We might engage SRAB to say, hey, does this policy make sense? Are there certain segments of the market sectors that we're not interested in? And we put that in the policy. And then we give it to the finance team and they run with it. They don't have to keep coming back to us and say, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? No, does it comply with the policy or not?
Okay, but so let's say you have a corporation that never hires any people of color or women, right? And all their higher ups are, white men, straight white men. Let's just say, right?
Want to go with meat eaters too?
So anyway, so we could say at the beginning, we support we want to support corporations that share our values of diversity, and then leave it at that, is what you're saying.
Yeah,
And we
essentially,
don't have
that
to.
is the policy that we're setting at the get-go. And the typical way that's done right now is set in these ESG scores. The nice thing is, that's already kind of done for us in the
Yes.
background, and we don't have to deal with that. We just say, this is our priority. Now, finance team, make it happen.
I'm broadly supportive of this. I guess the question I would have, and I'm recognizing that we can rabbit hole on this ad infinitum, and I don't want to do that. But for example, coming back to our earlier conversation on the Iran conflict, we've fired something like 1,000 Tomahawk missiles in the past few months, and Raytheon manufactures Tomahawks. We are going to replenish our stocks. So the flip side of this would be like, let's invest a pile of Lafayette money in Raytheon because we know they're going to be hired to build a lot of missiles. And so that's kind of the flip side. But then I guess what I'm driving at is I'd love to understand the cost benefit of deprioritizing certain things and prioritizing others, or if it all comes out in the wash. Because if I was a betting person, I would be betting on Raytheon right now. I don't work for them, but like we're going to replenish those missile stocks. So I hear you on not wanting to pick certain things, but at the end of the day, I want Lafayette City investments to be solid.
And I agree, but at the same time, we want to set the policy that is important to us as a community. And it might be things like oil and gas or something that we just, across the bar. It might be a great time to invest in oil and gas, and this is going to go through the roof. But we say, this is too big of a problem that we're all dealing with on a daily basis. We are going to de-emphasize that.
Yeah.
Can I also just suggest that, of course, we're looking only at fixed income securities. So your Raytheon example might be more beneficial on the equity side. They might have more of an equity move. The fixed income securities are going to be driven more from the fundamental interest rates and then the credit worthiness of the companies. So I don't just toss that out, but like to keep expectations, managing expectations for any windfall profits.
So process-wise, can we as a council suggest that SRAD review this along with Mary in the near future, bring some language back to us, and we could ratify what that piece means to us, and then set you free within the broad parameters that we come up with. Let's say we decide we don't want oil and gas or nuclear or, hazardous waste or anything like that, and we just tell you that, and then we don't have to talk about it anymore unless some new thing comes up. I will say, Kyle, in the ESG category in studying this, there were companies that were very green, but that also were not very diverse. And so you get this mixture of things when you start looking at them, and sometimes you have to choose. And if we just use that scoring model and say it has to have at least a score of whatever, we come up with, it won't be perfect, but it will get us closer to our goals.
Can I ask, because I think the one slide that we missed was the next steps. What's the timeline? When was this supposed to come back to us?
So we were planning to talk about bringing some of these back potentially in July. The investment policy requires a motion. The purchasing procedures require a first and second reading. So, if we need to have more discussions, we can do that too. Yeah, and I would just add, and again, there's lots of things we think about with our investment policy, not, as was stated here too, in terms of how we're best utilizing our resources and our investment income as well, so.
Councilor Gianello?
I just want to kind of, to close out that discussion that we were having, ask the staff, is it appropriate that we would engage SRAB in this? Does it make sense that we would want to do that? Is something that we need to do? Or is this something that is sort of council needs to do this?
Or other boards and committees as well.
Great, Human Rights Board.
Yeah, HRB Kingdom.
Yeah, I mean, it's your guys' call of whether you want to refer this. The boards work for you all. What I will say is it's very technical. And so that's why we have an entire investment advisor on this. And so we're happy to bring it forward and see what they bring forward. And if there's some things that maybe they bring forward that perhaps our investment advisor wouldn't advise against, we'll certainly bring those up as well. So it's your guys' call on whether you want to bring it forward to boards and the level of commitment to try to educate them to the level that we're trying to educate you all tonight too.
Did you want to finish?
I mean, I have something else on the other topic of whatever the other topic was. Purchasing. Yeah.
And I will just say also, there's just a lot of cleanup in this. This was a 2018 policy, so it refers to a lot of things that we don't refer to anymore. So there's also just a lot of cleanup that we would really like to do in light of $74 million in proceeds.
So have a procedural thought.
Can we make sure we just start going in order, because we're all talking over each other at this point? Councilor Beaulieu, I saw your hand up.
Thank you, Mayor. Just very briefly, I'm broadly supportive of this, but I would love to defer to Ms. Donovan's wisdom and judgment. I'm just very wary of rabbit holing and spending a lot of time on this, or asking boards and committees to spend a lot of time on this. And also, nuclear power is awesome. That's all there.
Well, we'll dispose the waste in your backyard.
Counselor Jensen.
I was going to say, in order, because it is detailed, and in order not to get down a rabbit hole, we could conceivably ask the SRAB just for categories of things they don't want to have included. And then we can work, staff and Mary, to work on a score that would work for the rest of the categories without.
You probably don't want to target a score, okay? The scoring is like 1 to 5. There's a lot of 3s, okay? But you want to keep flexibility here. You really do. So maybe a couple, if you want to put a couple of excluded sections in your policy, that would probably be fine, but I would not suggest that you hold yourself to a score, okay? Because you're looking at an average, okay? The portfolio has an average ESG score. You're trying to migrate up the scale as much as possible, but you don't want to get in a situation where you're really, coming up against a compliance problem on an ESG score. These things are very subjective.
Okay.
Okay? Very subjective.
So exclusions would be the SRAB role, and then with regard to HRB, I actually think it's much more difficult, much more subjective. Like, when you start looking at employment policies, and especially in entities that have been historically male-dominated occupations like engineering or something, and then you see that there are no women in the top management, and some of that is historical, and it eventually will get corrected. So I don't know myself what HRB could do for us in that regard.
I mean, I think it's the same kind of role where they're evaluating the market segments and saying firearms are one that Lafayette should not invest in. It's that same kind of role where they're evaluating for kind of what's in their lane. SRAB will be looking at sustainability, they'll be looking at something else. But I think it's kind of that same, so maybe the thing that it could be helpful for this is kind of what are the typical kinds of market segments that we can, the different buckets that we could say, not this bucket, not this bucket.
Tobacco, alcohol.
Yeah.
And firearms.
Drugs.
Those are the big ones.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's a broader category. It might be construction is another one. I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing some things out there, but it's these kind of broad categories.
Could I make a proposal, because a lot of it is the cleanup that we would really love to get going? Mary and I've been trying to do this for several years. Maybe disclude, because it is just a motion, disclude some of the sustainability language pieces, get the 90% of the cleanup that we want to get going right away. Bring that forward to you all with the promise in the next couple of months, as the boards have their agendas planned. Get that piece of it, come back one more time.
I would love that, only
Okay.
because I don't want to delay the entire thing for a
Yeah,
very small
yeah.
portion of it. So as long as council's okay with it. Council Gino, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I still had some concerns about the purchase.
Yeah, we can go to that piece, but for the investment piece, because that's the quicker one, is that okay?
Yeah, sounds great.
Great, thank you.
Council Gino.
Yeah, I mean, when I read this, it kind of struck me as a pretty significant policy change to say, where council is now reviewing and approving contracts over $100,000, I think is the current spend limit. And now it's not at all, ever, never, ever. And so to Council Brulier's point earlier, where it's, is it 500,000? Is it, is there some guideline that I think council should still have a role in oversight. We don't just give out, the checkbook unlimited all the time, and haven't done it historically. I don't see why we would make that change now. So I still think there should be a limit. Maybe it's not 100,000, maybe it's 1 million, maybe it's 500,000, to give more flexibility, especially as we're doing these kind of larger, capital intensive. But it just makes me nervous when it's a fundamental policy change. So just to put that out there. And then, is there a mechanism where we could have a call-up by council on some of these larger ones if we are not approving it, but then, we we are made aware that the city is engaging something that the community doesn't really approve of in some way. I don't know how they might find out, but, they say, oh, we are giving a contract to someone that, it was no bid, or it was, whatever it is. And so there can still be a call-up mechanism. I don't know if that is realistic or possible, given the timing and how things need to be, but just throwing some thoughts out there as we're thinking about what should these purchasing procedures look like.
Councilor Jensen?
So I worked for an organization that had an employee that stole a bunch of money, and after that, our policy was that if it was enough of a contract that it would make a major organizational problem if there was, let's say it was a false contract, or went to somebody, from Aruba who really wasn't a human being, what would be that number that would have caused so much difficulty that it needs another set of eyes? And that was how we looked at it, and I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts from council on this? Councilor Freeland?
I certainly see the need for, making sure that you can be nimble as you're doing these hard projects. So I definitely, I'm supportive of the intent, but I think I'm in agreement that it feels a little bit like a process that could run us into issues. And so I'm definitely in agreement that, can we find a middle path where it allows you that flexibility, but also still has I view it mostly as obviously this body, but public, communication too. So we're sort of telling the public what we're doing as we're going, so that they're aware of how much things are costing. So to me, it's almost as important as our oversight, because we do have some oversight at the budget time, right? So we do have that chance. So I don't know. I mean, maybe it's less of a needing to come to council and get approval, and more of here's the things that we've done within the budget constraints that have existed this year, some sort of updates. Maybe that could, I don't know what people think about that, but something middle ground.
That's interesting.
Mr. Mayor? When was the $100,000 limit established, roughly?
My understanding is that it went from, what's my note, because she's been here the longest, 25,000 when the former city manager, and when city manager Sprague came on board, it was increased to 100,000, and he came on board in early 2019. I don't know from when he came on board to when it was updated to 100,000, but it hadn't been updated prior to that for a very significant amount of time.
Thank you. I'm broadly in agreement of finding a sweet spot between 100K, which seems way too low. I agree on the flexibility and nimbleness, but having some sort of a check-in. I don't know if that's 500K or $1 million, but I would love to see something that gives you guys the flexibility, but also has the oversight component that Councilor Freeland mentioned.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just a little worried about putting a finite number on it, and a percentage above, the projected, or a percentage above.
How do you mean?
So if something is a $500,000, but it's clearly something that should be $500,000, I don't have a problem with that. But if there's something that is way more than it was projected to be, or there's a reason to do it out of sequence, like if this, for whatever the budget sequence is, when we get if we get an update, should we get an update? Like if it's going as planned, I don't know that the number's great, because we could, some of these expenses are going to be millions, I would think, along the way. And something that should have been 100,000 ends up being 700,000. That's a percentage out beyond what it's projected to be.
And in that case, if we didn't have 700,000 budgeted, I would not be allowed to approve it anyway. So if it's, the bond's 74 million, it comes in, so we would have to come back to you regardless to do a budget supplemental.
I think what I'm hearing from the majority of council is that we kind of want a creative way in which not necessarily keep approving everything, but maybe just keep us in the loop updated as to what is being spent. And that's for our sake, but also for the sake of just the public, which likes to kind of keep tabs on what's going on. Am I getting that sense from council? Is that kind of what we're looking at? Because my understanding is that this just from what we're saying, is kind of a big policy change in just kind of one ordinance. Is that kind of what I'm hearing from council?
I generally agree with that. I still think there is a value in the oversight as far as even a number,
I
potentially.
agree with Adam. I think there should be a number that requires council approval. I don't know that I know what it is, but maybe staff can tell us what they think it should be, but I think significant expenditures, changes should be approved by council.
Yeah, and perhaps I'm just spitballing now, it could be something, and we'll work with legal, but I'm hearing general direction, bring something back that's a little bit more finite. It could be something that looks different based upon whether it's an operating contract, like a consulting term, versus a capital project, where those are where you have to be more nimble. So if I could have some general agreements that those could be a higher dollar amount versus, I mean, I think we've brought back how many change orders for the water treatment plant, and it's a multi-billion, but it's all within budget. So maybe let me do a little research and creative thinking, but I generally appreciate the feedback and know where you guys are kind of headed, and can appreciate that oversight portion of your roles as well.
Okay, before I finish off, Councilor Ferdinand, I saw your hand up.
I'm just curious what other communities around us do, so maybe once we come back.
I could bring that too. It's
Interesting.
varies all over the place, but yeah, we have a whole email string from city managers that this question came up actually recently, so we'll have a comparison table as well.
Great, okay. Can we go through that final slide and just go through next steps from top to bottom?
Yep, so here's your next step. So we're starting the 2027 budget process. June, July, we're doing budget team presentations among the internal staff. And then at the end of August, we'll have the workshop with you all where we'll provide department overviews and the introduction to the 2027 budget. And then we have October 6th is our budget hearing number 1, and October 20th is our budget hearing number 2. In terms of the capital bond, as Maddie said, we'll, on September 1, we'll bring that debt authorization ordinance back for first reading, and then September 15th is the second reading. And then investment policy, so it sounds like we're going to bring back the cleanup maybe in July for a motion, recognize we've got some more work to do on those other pieces, and then the purchasing procedures that may be a little bit later based on some of the additional work, but we can certainly try for July, so.
Great. Any final questions on the financial update?
Just one quick comment. Thank you all so much for the presentation. And I guess just from my optic, although I imagine this is shared by council, but I won't speak for others. The questioning comes from, I want to be able to go back and talk to the community, and some of the questioning of sort of the revisiting the dollar figure, I think comes from wanting to be able to say, hey, we didn't just sort of like kick our heels up, but does not reflect any distrust in the excellent work done. So thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Sorry, just one point of clarification, and I should have asked it while he was still here. The sequence, and I'm gonna say archaic?
Yeah.
Like archaic?
Archaic.
Archaic. I mean, it's not, never mind. So I'll get the pronunciation, sorry. What's the handshake? Like if we're looking at milestones, along the way, I was gonna ask him, like, what are 3 significant milestones? I'm thinking digging a hole, putting up walls, finishing the paint. So these milestones along the way, if they could provide that so we can talk to the public about, hey, you know what, I know you're not seeing anything, but the ground is ready for this, this bit and piece, because it's a lot of money. And
Yeah.
I don't know who, I'm guessing it's Archaic.
Yes,
And not Davis Partnership or
which is not me.
DTC, yeah.
Would be the-
Yes, definitely. So we're going to have a couple tools that'll provide the community with outward-facing kind of milestones. And first, we're going to be using the Lafayette Listens platform, and we have some new modules, so we'll be able to have a separate page for the service center and for the BBRC, and then ultimately the Civic Center, so they can see exactly kind of where we are. And Archaic is going to be able to create kind of dashboards that show exactly sort of where we are in the project phasing. So, I mean, really our first milestone will be to get through these first phases of design so that we have schematic design by the time we're talking about bond issuance. And so we'll be able to have some pretty well, the design will be pretty well finalized essentially in the sense of what you're going to see kind of on the ground and what's going to be within the walls. And that's definitely will be pretty solid for what you'll see within the walls. There will be a lot of design work that'll still have to happen, especially with BBRC in terms of kind of what the interior is going to look like, what the finer points are going to look like, which way the doors are going to swing, things like that, But, and then that'll be kind of a big milestone. And then we will get the contractor on board for the BBRC, and we're going to get that while we're still kind of working through design. So we'll have the CMGC, which is the construction manager, and they will get on kind of while we're doing design so they can work to refine the costs. So then we hope to, by the time we go out to bond, to have more refined costs so that we know we're hitting the target with the costs for going out to bond. And then we'll slowly be kind of getting closer to the exact date when we'll be able to start construction in 2027 for both of those projects. So that's kind of where we're going, but we will have those dashboards. And as we get further along, I think our sort of targets for those dates will just get, closer and closer as we move.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. Oh, Councilor Jensen.
Sorry.
please.
I heard about the budget earlier this evening that the BBRC may be affected because of construction and the revenue will be limited. One thing that occurs to me, and you guys are probably already on top of this, but for example, if BBRC is not down during the Christmas holiday, when we would normally have a lot of families using the services, things like that, if we can take that into consideration on the schedule. And then with regard to community engagement for the BBRC, I'm hoping that we are intending to hit special populations like kids with sensory disorders or in wheelchairs or things like that, so that we do a lot of outreach to marginalized special populations that maybe aren't currently using BBRC, but if it were designed differently, could be using it. So that's just feedback from me. But with regard to trying to maximize revenue, to the extent we can close it at the worst times, and keep it open during the best times would be part of the scheduling that I hope you would consider.
We're trying. The tough part is the aquatic center will need to be completely shut down. So the rest of the center will still be open as we go through construction, but because we have to do a full swipe of the aquatic center. So we're also looking at extending hours at GOWP, the shoulder seasons and all of that to help accommodate some of the impacts, but there will be impacts. All right, thank you all.
Great, thank you. Our second agenda item tonight is a council meeting norms discussion. And from my understanding, our two counselors are going to lead today. So I'll
It's nice
let
seeing you.
them have a second to get their presentation up on the screen, and then
We're gonna, you guys know why you're here
Yeah.
to talk about it, so, and you know the background, we all chatted, so I'm gonna turn it over to these lovely gentlemen that we met with to.
I mean, we've talked about this a few times, right? Some of our meetings, especially early in the year, we're going very late. I feel like we have been doing better at that, so that's really good news. But, as we were starting to talk about this and think through it, there were a number of things that came up as, some kind of quick wins that we could probably, get started on if we so chose. And then the next slide would be things that need a little more discussion, right? So starting off here, you can see a few of these things. One of them holding questions till the end of the presentation. I think we have been doing better at that. So I think that's a one that we could talk about a little bit, depending on how we feel. Noting the length of the different elements in our agenda, and specifically in, presentations that are given to us. Kind of then I think leads into number 3, right? Where once we note the timing that is, anticipated, right? And if we keep going over it, for example, we'll know that, hey, we need to tighten up something because we keep going over that one thing. And then we could lead to, limiting presentations, limiting items more strictly once we get information, I think. So I view those as sort of like, one where it's like, let's measure it. And then if we have to, let's manage it, right? And then that last one there, limiting executive sessions to a certain amount of time. I think, again, pushes us to say how long we think something's gonna take. And then we know if something's going wrong, right? Because it's going over. So I think that's probably the first step of that one as well, is let's aim for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, whatever. And they can be different depending on the topic, probably. So these are the ones that, I think we felt when we discussed that this could be, first step, low-hanging fruit. And so curious what people think about these ones. And sorry, if
No, that was great. The only thing I would add is, I appreciated that Councilor Fridlin, when I brought this up a couple months ago, sort of put the question on the table of like, why are we going so late? And I agree with you, we have done better, but there was a spate of somewhere between 4 and 6 meetings that went abominably late. And the nice thing is that we collectively control that. It's not imposed on us. And so I think a question that I'd love some folks' thoughts on is really answering your question in terms of why we thought that was the case. I agree that we've been doing better. But then this slide and then the next slide, I think, will help us kind of grapple with potential solutions to that challenge, particularly since we've had a relatively light series of agendas, even while a great deal of churn and comment, particularly on the cemetery issue. So, it was a very hectic first couple months, and then this has been an interesting couple months, and then there's a lot ahead in the summer with land use code and with the budget up ahead. And so the next slide speaks a little bit to what kind of norms we would be interested in co-creating for ourselves. But I just want to put that question on the table as well in terms of why we think that was happening and what we could collectively do differently. And I'm happy to just go first to say that I believe that counselors are the primary reason the meetings are going so long. Then I think that there were some staff presentations that could be tightened up. And then I think the extensive public input that we enjoy from our community is probably the third on my list. But I'll go ahead and stop there.
Okay, before I call on anyone, I know you're all running the thing. What do you want to do in terms of format? Do we want to go slide 1, slide 2? Do we want to kind of hit the topic that's on the table now? What is best? And I'll defer to both
I
of
think
you.
maybe we go through both, the quick to adopt and then the need to discuss. That way everybody knows what has sort of been put on the table already. And then that way, I'm sure there are other ideas. And so that way you can see and then we can add in. And then we can go back to each one. Does that seem reasonable?
It seems to me whether we like these solutions or not depends on what we think the problem is. And if we agree on what the problem is, then we can go back and say these solutions will work. But if we disagree on what the problem is, then we might have disagreement about the solutions.
And I'm totally with you, that I don't think we have agreement on what the problem is. And I don't think we will come to an agreement necessarily. Some of these are built to help us understand what might and be like a step 1 to step 2 sort of thing, right? For example, right? Length of staff presentation, right? If the problem is staff is going too long on presentations and we don't have a strict, whether that be a hearing and the applicant is going long too, right? If we first put minutes to that and say, this is 10, this is 15, this is 30, and we keep going over, right? We've just tested our hypothesis. Maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong. Same for, if you go to the next one, same for the council norms, right? If Councilor Buller is correct that it's us that's going along, well, maybe those norms will help us, and then we, take another step with the norms. Or, if it's executive sessions or if it's public input, right? Like, we're kind of dipping our toe in the water with the first ones that then we may or may not need to go to these harder ones. Because I don't think we know what the problem is.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're going to find it today.
Just to quickly build on that, I think there is shared consensus, and Katie, please correct me if otherwise, among council and staff that the meetings were too long. I think there's broad consensus on that problem. in terms of your point of like the diagnosis of the why, I agree that, maybe there's different ways, but, the first step when you're in a hole, right, stop digging. So we get that. I would love some folks' thoughts on what you think the problem is, and then on whether some of these jump out to you as, that would be helpful for us to collectively wrap our arms around the challenge.
Okay, so we're already here, let's just go through these and then come back to that issue and see if we can find any sort of agreement on what the problem is. So let's run through these, whoever wants to go through them.
So I'd like to start with number 1. I've noticed that a lot of questions are asked during the various presentations, and they're often questions that are addressed on future slides. So I do think that's a great one to implement. That question slide is in there for a reason. So if you do have a question, it will be answered.
So that's number 1 on the previous slide.
Yes.
Yep.
And just on that topic, and I know staff has been doing this, especially on longer presentations that have a lot of substance to them, a lot of information, they kind of, like today's presentation, they break it up in different sections and allow for questions, because we know if you were to go through that whole thing and then wait till questions at the end, there's a lot there. So that one is very straightforward to me.
So yeah, let me just run through really quickly the next slide, and then we'll go back to the discussion, if that sounds good.
Yep.
And I think this is a really good example, actually, if you hit the, sorry. This is a really good example, right? Exactly what's happening right now is like, I don't know how I'm just gonna say it really directly, work together better, right? Where we're more efficient with our time in our conversation. And like, that might be, for example, you tried to lead us there and we didn't follow you whatsoever. All of us, right? Not me as well. And so like, that might be something that we should talk about and work on together, right? How can we empower you? How can we seed more control, like tell you, keep us on track, right? Like, I don't know exactly, but like maybe we should put working norms down on a page and agree to them. And maybe that would make us more efficient. So that's the first one. A meeting time limit. We talked a little bit about this, Mayor. I thought it was an interesting idea. It sounds like what other folks do too is you get to 10, 11 p.m. and you have to vote to say that we're going to keep going. That's a light one where if we've got something that's going on that's really important, we can keep going. But at least we have a check where it's like, you know what, we gotta stop. It's too late, And this thing, whatever we're talking about, is not important enough. Executive sessions, right? And then, some of these here, obviously, would be a challenge, I think, our community, especially given some of what's been going on. The last few meetings where people come and talk to us, adjusting public input could be a challenge, and certainly one that needs further discussion. But there are ways that we could sort of, take half steps where if you're a resident, you get a certain amount of time. If you're not a resident, you get less amount, different amount of time. Things like that could help us there. If we so deem that is a problem, right, that needs to be solved. And then also just sort of tightening up things like proclamations. Do we need to have every single one that we read out, or like how could we tighten that up a little bit? We certainly have some, great proclamations that come through all the time, but they do take time, and so that's definitely a piece. So I think that's all of the different items that we brought up as ideas. So if we do want to go to discussion, that sounds good.
Great. Where do we want to begin discussion? Directly to these, or Councilor Beaulieu? I know you wanted to kind of hit that topic. Do you want to start us there?
On the working norms, Mayor?
Not necessarily the working norms, but if we could find somewhat of a consensus on council as to what is causing the lengthy meetings.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what folks think. Councilor Jensen.
Councilor Jensen.
Sees it from you.
Yeah,
So I'm thinking to some of the meetings that went really long, and I'm thinking about the storage facility. And in that particular case, none of us were excited about approving the storage facility. We had kind of squishy guidance from our attorney about what the legal path forward was. And we have 3 new counselors who didn't really know what we could and couldn't do if we wanted to say no to this facility. Was there a legal path forward to say no? And I think part of the reason our conversation, our dialogue went so long is we were struggling with our community didn't want this, but the rules under which we were functioning sort of forced us to approve it. And I believe that's not going to happen that often, but maybe, I don't know. You guys who have been around longer might know more, but as new people, we were trying to figure out how that works when we know what the community wants and we know what the law and the rules say, and they don't match. You know, and I think that was one of the reasons. But I have a different, someone said to me recently, if you've got questions, why don't you ask them in advance? And last meeting, I sent some questions to Katie before the meeting, and they were answered well, and I didn't have to ask those questions. So the lesson I learned from that was, to the extent possible, read your materials as quickly as you can after you get them, and then try and ask some of those questions so that, number one, staff has a heads up, and number two, they might be answered and you don't have to raise them in the meeting. So I've learned something about that in that process. But I also have a real problem with that we get the PowerPoint so late. Because often the questions are answered in the PowerPoint, as you mentioned, but I haven't had a chance to read them because I got them on Tuesday at 4 or 3 or 1 even, and I really think some of that is that staff doesn't have control when we have an outside entity like BCHA in this case, presenting to us when we did Willoughby Corner, and that information is not in the control of staff. But there was information in the BCHA piece that wasn't in our packet, that didn't get delivered until late that day, that answered questions that I had, but I did not have a chance to read them because they came so late. So I'd like to rearrange the timing of when we get the presentations, especially from outside entities, because I guess that would be development-related projects where we have a developer who's, giving us information, because I feel like getting their PowerPoint presentation at 4 o'clock on the day of council meeting is not helpful. Because I've already formulated all my questions in my head at that point, and I would rather they come sooner. So those are just my two thoughts.
If I could provide a little context around that. So staff do dry runs every Monday. We can talk about getting presentations that Monday. So we go through all the presentations, we think through what are some of the questions that are going to come, is this the right level, et cetera, et cetera. So we do the whole meeting twice, actually. You guys do it once, but we do it twice that Monday morning. And so we could do that. One of the things that we're trying to limit is the number of times that our city clerk has to upload different versions, because your public input doesn't turn off until 1 p.m. on that Tuesday, that we then put into the packet as well, which is oftentimes what has been driving that the presentations go along with the public input. So it's just one upload, one time. So we could do it a little bit, but then we might want to consider when we cut off when people submit for public input to be included into the packet.
Would you explain that? I have not seen that our presentations from people have addressed specific questions in public input.
No. So there's two different processes. So if somebody wants to provide public input to be included in that meeting's packet, currently our cutoff time is 1 p.m. on Tuesday. And so because it's a very manual process to continue to upload the packet and make it accessible and all of that, we have paired our presentations. So we could definitely get it by the right after 1 p.m., but that still sounds like it's not early enough. But I'm just trying to limit the number of times our city clerk has to go back and upload our packet the entire city council packet.
Maybe something we could add as a hanging in there is that public input that is provided by 9 p.m. the day prior, that's the cutoff. We'll still see it, we'll all review it, but it wouldn't need to be added to the packet, because 1 p.m. is rather late.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an option that we could have as well.
Yeah.
And something when Councilor Fridland and I met with Katie last week that really stuck with me is that you mentioned how council meetings are fundamentally business meetings. And we all have many business meetings. And a business meeting that takes 6-7 hours is inherently not working properly. So I take the points that you've raised, Councilor Jensen, so I'd love to hear other diagnoses in terms of what's going on, what the problem is, and whether these are fit for purpose for addressing it.
I mean, I'll jump in and say, despite the fact that I agree with you that it is a business meeting, there's a very real aspect of these council meetings that is a public notice. You know, this is the action the city government is going to take. And that is put out there for the public. So it's yes, if we ran every business meeting like we run a city council meeting, this is very inefficient of a business. But businesses don't have to do this public. It's like if the businesses had to report out to their shareholders in every single meeting, nothing would ever get done. And we sort of have that obligation, I think, to the public to have, you know, full discussions. And, you know, it's different than a business meeting, I guess, is where I'm landing.
Well, interesting, you know, we had some people who were not happy at the last meeting because the Arapahoe Theater hadn't gone before the Historical Commission. And then when the presenter showed the timeline and said they would be going to the Historical Commission in the next week, I think they were planning on, you know, testifying and saying they were unhappy, but then they were, so had they seen that presentation earlier, they may not have been, you know, they may not have written to us with their discomfort with the process because we would have told them sooner too.
So I'll just jump in here on this. Back to category number 1, the approximate length of, and I think it's more than just staff presentation, it's maybe agenda items, right? If we say agenda item number A should take X minutes, B take, we've done that in some of the board and commission meetings. And I can't remember any time when that was done accurately. Like so we just would need staff to be realistic as opposed to optimistic, because setting poor expectations makes everyone antsy of like, well, now we're behind of where we thought we would be, and so now we got to kind of rush to get caught up. So I like that idea of noting the approximate length of things, but this is something that I've seen encountered in the past. It's never caused an issue, but except for this, like, we feel like we're behind, so we're trying to rush to get through something and not giving it the full attention that it necessarily needs.
Other thoughts? Mayor Pro Tem? I think giving grace to the time limits, so we have an understanding and just estimating. If our city manager, looking at the agenda, estimates how long it might take to get through, understanding we might miss that mark. It might come sooner, it might come later. Putting a number on it is fair, I think. I'm wondering about the public, if they were to see, or we're thinking if this would be on the official one that's released. That
doesn't have to be. It could be.
Yeah, it could be.
It could be on this
It
one.
could be an internal, you know, it could be us just trying to keep track and make sure we're on schedule.
Yeah, and so part of the challenge comes with expectations, as you said, like the public expects to see council's meeting. And it's not a business meeting. And there are also, it's different from the public discussions. It's an unusual beast that we need to have expectations that there's going to be some things that we're going to miss wide out. But I don't think it's bad to put time limits on all of, for us. So we have an expectation of what it might look like, but I wouldn't publish that to the public, because if we say something's going to go for an hour and it goes for 20 minutes, and someone is coming to see, like, why did you end it early? It didn't take that long.
I guess, Mayor Pro Tem, my question on that is, because I have confidence that if Director Arthur gets 10 minutes to deliver a presentation on X, that he can do it in 9 to 11 minutes. I have confidence in that. I do not, candidly, have confidence that we can hold ourselves within an hour, if that's what we allot. And I think being very blunt in this conversation, to Councilor Fidlin's point earlier, I think would be helpful for us. I think we have collectively struggled to keep our discussions within relative bounds on a number of topics. Councilor Jensen gave a example earlier, and Councilor Fidlin pointed out, oftentimes we fight the mayor in facilitating the meeting. And that's something I would gladly cede more authority to the mayor to guide us within bounds, within reason. And I do respectfully disagree that business doesn't mean private sector. It is a business meeting. We have an agenda, there are minutes, we're conducting affairs of state. But I stipulate it's not a private sector meeting, we're not having shareholders. But there's something about conversations that can last from 25 minutes to 45 minutes to an hour and a half, kind of depending on how we all feel, that then I'm like, are we giving short shrift to other weighty topics? Does that make sense?
Yes, and if I may go to the second half, yes, absolutely. We've got to show some respect for the meeting situation. And yes, we're here to conduct business, and it's not the private sector, it is public business. And the mayor's here to get us through the bits and pieces. And I think if we do recognize the fact that there are constraints around our decisions, and we are here to represent the public legally, that's the challenge. It's like, if we know what the law is and the attorney makes it clear what the law is, if what we would like to see, and maybe the public would like to see that as well, or vice versa, only the public wants to see that. If for some reason it's not possible to make that decision, then we gotta look back at the process or what happened prior to that. And there's a lot of bits and pieces that we deal with, and unfortunately, that's what we have to do. And I think we have to take what's presented to us and understand that we are 7 people that are due to agree. And out of respect for each other, we've got to say, I don't like this, but I can live with this. I don't know if that's helpful.
That's a great point.
So just an observation, prior to January, we were able to get through much longer agendas in a much shorter period of time. So again, I think it does go back to that first easy to implement strategy that you came up with. So I definitely think holding questions will help us a lot. Sometimes I feel that we do go a little bit off tangent. Even tonight during the workshop, there was a point where, I felt we were getting a little off the beaten path. So I do think questions and comments should be more direct if possible.
Councilor Gallegos supports the holding questions. Is there anyone who opposes that? I feel like that's the first one we can just slam dunk.
I think I need a definition here, because as the mayor mentioned, people are giving parts of their presentation and then saying questions, because it's hard to remember, a long presentation and write lucid comments or questions at the end. So I feel like we're already doing that, where you are asking us to hold questions till we get to that question piece in the staff presentation. So I'm not sure what we're changing.
I think what we're changing is just kind of solidifying for us that we're going to hold to that. Because it still happens every now and again, and we're just saying we're definitely going to hold, and what staff can definitely do, and they're already doing, is adding those question slides. And let's all just agree now, we hold until the question slide come up, and if so, I don't think anyone is opposed, from what I hear.
That's my approach as well, Mayor, with obviously a reasonable exception ESG. If you didn't know what that was, like, oh, I'm so sorry, what's ESG? And then we continue, but yeah, exactly what the mayor
Yeah, I
said.
think clarifying questions where somebody uses an acronym or something that you don't know what they're talking about makes sense to sort of just jump in and say, what does that mean? But other than that, I think holding till the questions makes sense.
If I may, if we use Bob's rules and you say, I have a clarification or a question, just a point of clarification, and still, save the questions for the end, I think that's fair enough. If it's a clarifying question versus a substantive question.
Great, we've reached the point where we're going piece by piece, so let's go to number 2, approximate length of staff presentation in advance of the meeting. Actually, 1, 2, and 3 are kind of all similar to me, actually not 4, 2 and 3 are similar to me. And I will say, I just looked it up because I knew this was true. There are other cities that currently in their public agenda give out the amount of time that is allotted for each specific thing. And the way they break it down, for example, I'm looking at Boulder, the way they break it down is the total time, and then they go staff time, council time, and that's how they break it down. They're usually very generous with the amount of time they give to their council. So just as an example, that is already being done publicly by one of our neighbors. So I don't necessarily see an issue with it. I will just begin there. I think limiting a staff presentation to a certain amount of time, depending on what that presentation is, maybe limiting us to a certain amount of discussion time, and then doing it publicly, to me, is perfectly fine. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Councilor Jensen.
I like that. However, if in the process of the council time, we feel like we still have lots of questions, it could be that you abstain or don't vote for it because you didn't feel your questions were answered, and you could say at that moment, I still have too many questions to vote on this at this point, and then we can figure out if we need to extend the amount of time, consider it at another meeting, or whatever that might be. But I like the idea of having a target, of a half hour seems like the right amount of time to talk about this or whatever it is.
Sorry, Councilor Blair, what was the question?
I don't know that we're allowed to abstain from a vote
That is
or to
correct.
not vote.
So we'd be a no.
I think what we would do is if we go down the path and we write some norms, which I would just love to have, just council norms, we could easily vote ourselves to an extension of time. And I think what we're doing with this is just trying to hold ourselves accountable for that amount of time. But if there's a topic that comes up where we need an extra 30 minutes, an extra hour, I think as a majority, we can just decide to do that.
Sounds good.
I mean, my question is this an exercise for the staff to say, assuming the meeting is going to go till, let's say, we agree tonight on the next page to the rule about how long the meeting is going to take. Number 2, the meeting will go till 11 o'clock. So we have 4.5 hours, if I'm doing my math right. And then they work backwards and say, okay, agenda item 1, and sort of break it down. Whether it's public or not, I think that information is helpful, especially if we had a goal in mind of the end time.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yeah, yes, and it then puts, I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but starting with an end time and then working backwards versus being efficient. And as Councilor Gallegos pointed out clearly, we got through some huge agenda items simply because we had the opportunity to ask very good questions along the way. And agendas that look like they might go to 11 could go to 9.
Yeah.
So I think it's more of, and we could put a 10-minute limit on all staff presentations. We could say that's the mark that we're working for. We could put a limit on all of these bits and pieces, and then respectfully be dialed in with, when we have a question and comment. I appreciate the idea of setting a, long-term time limit, but then it starts to, it might get to the point where people have expectations of where we're going to get, not just councilors, but the public. And I will reference one of the meetings that the former mayor heard very clearly from the public that they weren't able to get here due to work issues for public comment. We moved it to the beginning of the meeting so people could, could get public comment earlier. And then someone said, well, I don't get work until 9. And then the condition that was put in is that we'll do public comment when somebody if they come in, you can do public comment, fill out the form, boom, and whatever we're doing, they can come in to get their public comment. So it does get messy, and at the very end, it's imperative that we are conscious of the time that it's taking to do things, and not saying that since it says that we're going to go to 11, drawing stuff out. I just wanted to throw that out, but I do respect the fact that an absolute limit is probably pretty important. So nothing after 11, just generally.
Please.
So I am not in favor of limiting staff presentation times. I do feel that certain presentations are more data intensive. I like to look at the number of slides that are presented to me, and if I see 12 slides, I sometimes assume 3 to 5 minutes a slide, and I'm able to calculate about how long I feel that presentation should go. But saying, staff, you have 15 minutes to present this really complicated thing, I don't think will help any of us.
I'll jump in there and say, sorry. I like the limiting staff and presentation as long as it's not a set number. I think when we look at, if they're giving us an update on the 701, the Pocket Park, and then looking at a budget like tonight, those cannot be in the same box. Those have to be separate, and one's going to take a lot longer than the other. So I like the way it's written, whereas limit staff presentation to more than blank minutes. And I think through the run-through and through just understanding of staff, when they do that, when they make those presentations, they can kind of do it themselves and tell us, well, this is probably going to take this long. So I like the idea, but I like the idea of it being open-ended and allowing staff to give themselves
I was going to say
time.
the same thing, but less articulately. I think I completely agree. There was one particular presentation we got earlier in the spring that I think we all thought would be like 12 or 15 minutes. It went on to like 50 minutes. We were like, when is this going to end? So I think just having some time, so I agree with you. I think if there's this is going to be 10 minutes, this is going to be 20 minutes, whatever, I agree with you. Important things, different. But then I trust city leadership to say, you want to do a 35-minute presentation on the Pocket Park? No, back to square one. So I guess the norm I would be encouraging is to continue to structure staff presentations, which I think there's already been great work done. I mean, the objective up front and then the questions thing. So maybe we're all in kind of violent agreement on 2 to 3 if those caveats are included. Mm-hmm. Anything else? Sweet. Number 4, executive session.
To me, this is just an extension of number 3. I think staff knows kind of how long something should take, and to me, just their understanding of what that discussion might look like is just give us a time limit up front.
And it's sort of going to depend on here if you wanted to move forward with number 3 as well, because then you'll be set to sort of the limit naturally.
Yeah. So with that, because it will depend, let's move on to the next page.
Perfect. So I think we've kind of been talking about number 1 here in terms of co-creating some of these working norms. Who knows, maybe some of you all want to have the pleasure that we have of being on a subcommittee to create these. But let's sort of set that one aside and talk about the executive session, because further to the mayor's point, I recall a couple executive sessions where the presentation from staff was very detailed, and so that kind of constrained the amount of dialogue that we could have if we were to say, you get only 45 minutes or you get only an hour. But if the presentation is so long, but also there was a great deal of interrupting by counselors with questions throughout. So I think to some extent we may be able to meet in the middle, but I would broadly be in favor of limiting the executive session time 45 minutes, 60 minutes, 75, depending on what staff advise based on the weightiness of the topic.
So you're saying not start at 4:30?
4:30 would be great if it's a 59-minute executive session. Mm-hmm. If it's going to be like a 75 or 90-minute executive session, then I don't know if we move it earlier or later, depending on what works for everyone.
Okay, so the word all is up there.
Yeah, maybe it should say nearly all.
Nearly all. Got it.
Councilor Jensen.
I think having executive sessions after a long meeting, and I think we did one where we started like at 11.
A few, yeah.
And I think that's not a good way to do it ever. We're not thinking well, we're not at our best, and executive session issues tend to be really important issues, and I don't think it's good to be doing that at 11 o'clock at night when we're not thinking well. But I do think we could have the same principle that we had in the first slide, which is we allow staff to get through their presentation and we wait and hold on our questions, because you're right, we did interrupt, I'm guilty, a lot during those executive sessions, and it may be that made it take longer than it should. So I would change or I would add back in something from the first slide about in executive sessions, we let staff give their presentation and hold questions the same way we had that in the first slide. But I don't want to do important executive sessions at 11 o'clock. I just don't even think we should ever do that.
I agree with you. My hope is that none of our meetings go regularly 5.5 hours. I think that's too long as it is. Sorry, were you going to say something, Dave?
So just a challenge with having executive sessions at 4:30 is, I think it's a good idea. I think it worked well when we did it. If we can do it, we should try to. However, if we're not notified about it until the Thursday before, it simply may not be possible sometimes.
For working folks,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I think as long as, if we see one well ahead and we say, hey, just like we did with that one, then I think it will work. But I think we just need to give people enough time to clear calendars, hold space, or if we just hold that space all the time, that could be something we do too, but just a challenge.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the sentiment, and we've had hard executive sessions, but there have been harder ones. So and I've heard, I did hear clearly people go, wow, this is a hard decision. Yeah, and they can be worse. By worse, I mean more uncomfortable. So if we have an hour to make it, it's going to be prudent. It's going to be important for us to say, like, okay, I have to fully understand this, and not being 11 o'clock at night will help, but they're not going to get, they could get harder, I should say that.
Because we have more energy.
Yeah, but we still got all over that hour.
I mean, to the point we discussed earlier, where there's a dry run of the city council meeting by staff, the question is there a dry run of the executive session in the same way, so that they know kind of what the timing and expectations are? Sometimes there are, sometimes there are not. Sometimes we have, experts that come that are, not maybe available to do the dry run. I don't know.
We always do, yeah.
We do.
Yeah, we do the entire meeting twice.
Including executive session.
Yes. I'm a
Okay.
fan of no surprises, so
Strike
yes.
that. Strike that.
So to the point of no surprises, I'm going to commit to trying to ask my questions in writing in advance to the extent I mean, sometimes something you guys say prompts a question in me that I never thought of before, so just reading the material might not be enough to do that. But to the extent I have questions about things, I'm going to try to ask them in advance in writing and get answers, so I don't need to ask them in the meetings.
I think that's good, and I've done the same, and I will try to do the same. I reserve the right to ask those questions in the meeting anyway, because of this public notice function.
Right,
Because a
good
lot of
point.
times, those
Yeah,
are
yeah.
what my questions are relating to.
Well, and I think a couple of times when we felt like we were in between a rock and a hard place, asking the question out loud identifies for the public that they can see this rock and hard
Yeah,
place that
exactly.
we're in, so that they know we're just not being cavalier about the difficult situation. So it's good to get them out in the public.
My one question on all this is I feel like some of these land use issues are wild cards. We don't always have all the information until the meeting is occurring.
What
Even
do
if
you
we get the
mean?
presentation because we're not getting the presentation from the public, which is as equally important as the presentation from the applicant. We're only getting that during the meeting. And so that may spur other questions. That may spur discussion rabbit holes that we didn't even know existed. And so to me, that feels like those are squishy. It's hard to predict.
I would agree. I think we look at those on a case-by-case basis, because you're right. We look at public hearings as they come, right? We don't know what's going to come in terms of public testimony, in terms of all of that. So I would agree with that. To kind of shift us back to finish off the executive session topic. For me, starting at 4:30 doesn't make our meeting shorter. If we're committing to an hour executive session, it just means our meeting starts an hour earlier. So I think that's not necessarily the right way to look at this and frame this. The other part to me is starting at 4:30 may work, but I understand calendars are difficult. So for me, I'm not fully sold on that one, just because I know my calendar's extremely difficult at times. And the other part is, to point of Councilor Bullier earlier, if everything else works, we ideally shouldn't be going into executive sessions at 11 p.m. And that second bullet is very interesting to me, because even if we do go till 11 p.m., if we agree on something like that, the absolute latest we could go into an executive session is 11 p.m. Again, unless we vote to extend longer. So I know I said a few different things there, but I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm not fully sold on the 4:30 p.m. I think I'm more sold on just staff doing their dry run, understanding what that executive session might look like, and then us committing to trying to shorten that on the back end. I'm fine with going after the meeting, especially if we need more time.
You're not as old as me.
That's fair. But again, if you start at 4:30 and it goes till 11, that's still a 6.5 hour
No,
meeting,
for me, it's
7.5 hour.
the late night. My
Yeah.
brain turns off, at some point.
That's fair.
And perhaps it could be a case by case, like where we did have outside legal counsel, it does charge by the hour, this type of thing,
Yeah.
where we do have an advance notice, and so we can play with a lot. In all of these, they all seem like we're gonna just pilot them anyway and see how they work, so.
Councilor Gallegos?
I would be in favor of not conducting regular business after 10 p.m.
10 p.m.
So anything that requires a vote, I would say by 11, especially on days when I wake up 5:30, my brain's fried, I don't feel 100% coherent, I don't want to make a decision at that time.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you. That's heard that many, many times. And I would also just say, again, it's gonna be up to us, because if we're getting into 15 minutes left in our ultimate time limit, and we haven't started the executive session, or there's a meeting item that we haven't gotten to, sometimes we're under a time crunch that's not under our control. It could be getting the language for a ballot initiative, that it's gotta be done that day, or we're gonna miss a deadline. Or there's just these timelines sometimes that aren't flexible, and we just have to make a decision or miss an opportunity. So sometimes it's gonna be up to us to get it done that night in order to
I think
serve
this
the
is
city.
this is a really good point. I do think we can find a lot of different examples where we need to flex, but then I think coming back to your point, my hope would be that 90% of the time we're concluding our regular business by 10. I thought 10:30 because I feel like 5 hours is a nice solid number, but 10 ideally. I think, if something important and weighty happens, we have an emergency, we'll all stay up till 3 a.m., right? That's why we do this. But for regular business, no.
No, and I'm not talking about staying up till 3 a.m. I'm saying make a decision and we still get out by 10,
Yeah,
but not have to keep extending.
Yeah.
So that we're here until
Absolutely.
11:30.
absolutely.
We have to
But
decide
I
that
take
we're-
your point on the 4:30, not necessarily.
Okay, we've talked about number 2 a bit, so I want to hear from the councilors who haven't spoken up about this one in particular. Is there interest in setting a time limit or end time? And if so, what is that time? I've heard a couple different numbers.
I'd love to shoot for 10:30.
And when this comes back to us, can we I know a couple municipalities around us already have a set time. I think it's 11, maybe 11:30 for a few. So can we just get the examples whenever
Yeah,
we look at this?
peek.
Yeah.
Boulders is 3 a.m.
They get done before you guys now.
Yeah, they have short meetings.
That's not normal.
I'm certainly supportive of this. I think it drives a lot of the other things too. It forces us to become more innovative in how we make this more efficient. And so I think to Councilor Gallego's point, going after 10, making important decisions after 10 is just, it's not a good idea. If we can help it.
Councilor Gallegos?
And I also think we need to be considerate of our staff members who have been here since 8 a.m.
Absolutely. We were talking at, funny enough, CML today with Councilor Gallegos and a member of staff for a different city. I won't say the city, but they were telling me, when our council goes to midnight, that's a 16-hour day for me. We have to be considerate of that. And it sounds like we're all kind of okay with number 2. So I'm going to bring us back to number 1 because it's really important to me. Because, again, at CML today, I was in the Mayor's Mingle, I believe is what it was called. And they asked the question, how many cities have council norms or working rules for council? And we were one of 2 cities that didn't. Every single city in that room had council. This is something that's really, really important to me and something that I think we should do. The word subcommittee got thrown around. I'm not going to second that. However, if someone would like to take this on, I think this is a fantastic idea. And I'd love to hear the rest of the council.
Well, we have what is the council rule?
We have that handbook.
That's rules, not norms.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Can I throw out a couple norms and then you guys can react? One, I would love to give the mayor more hammer authority. I can't think of a metaphor. To drive us forward. I trust the mayor to drive us forward, and something I notice is that, like, if there's interrupting of questioning going on, well, I don't want to be left out. I'm going to start interrupting questioning too. If there's 2, 3, 4 bites of the apple of questions, well, I don't want to only bite the apple once. I want to, you see what I mean? So there's 1, I want to give the mayor more, move us along. And then there's 2, I kind of think we should generally hold ourselves to make up a number, 2 bites at the apple of questions per presentation. And I've noticed sometimes, Timmy will present, I'll ask a question, it goes around the horn. I'll ask another question, it goes around the horn. I'll ask another question, it goes around the horn. And we're an hour and a half later. And so to some extent, if we were to, again, pick a number, 2 bites at the apple, doing something to kind of constrain ourselves within reason, not a straitjacket, that way, that helps the mayor, and it forces us to be a little bit more efficient. And one thing I would actually just push back on, I don't want you not asking questions in meetings. One, because of the public notice element that Councilor Gianola
Well, it
mentioned.
depends on what it is.
True, but I also want to know the answer to the question. So I really want you to
Right,
ask the
and
questions
I
in the
agree.
meeting.
Yeah.
And then maybe the third norm I would throw out is, for the counselor reports section, I know some of us use that a lot, some of us don't. Maybe just clarity among ourselves on what we want to use that space for. Is it 2 minutes of updates? Is it a 20-minute soliloquy about how much I love Shakespeare? I don't know. Just those are 3 norms that I would just put on the table for folks to consider, and I would love to hear others.
So agree with the two around the horns, or, kind of, I think that's a good goal. It's sometimes, and I think one of the things we're finding is that we always have flexibility, right? We're not trying to hold ourselves to rigid rules. These are goals, these are norms, these are ideals, and there can be flexibility if we need it. So I think 2 is a great goal.
2, would you explain what you mean?
So if it's your turn to ask questions, you ask your questions and then you're done. And then everybody else gets
But
their
not
turn.
2 questions, you can ask
No,
multiple
yeah.
questions. Okay.
It's your time for questions, and then you might get a second time for questions, but you may not get a third time. Is sort of, I think, the way that we're approaching this.
And what I'm struggling with that is if somebody else in their questions raises a whole new angle that the rest of us haven't even thought about before, and now you raise a topic I've never even heard of, and I don't know what you're really talking about, and now all of a sudden I have a whole bunch more questions because I don't understand what you're saying, and it's new to me.
Yeah, I mean, and this is, I think, the idea of 2 is that you kind of get that, and I've seen other councils where they do 1 time around the horn, and that's it. And then it's time for a motion, time for a vote, and that feels harsh to me, that you don't get a second chance to speak. But I think that we're in agreement that, well, it's 2 as the goal. We have flexibility.
Yep, I like it. I like the 2 because exactly what Councilor Gianola just said. If you have all your questions out in the first round, and then someone asks a question, and everyone's had the opportunity to speak, and we go through proper Robert's rules, you're not allowed to speak again, right? If we actually look at it by the book, you're not allowed to speak, if you've spoken, you're not allowed to speak until everyone's had the opportunity to do it again, to do it once. So this is actually the perfect way to do it. You get all your questions out in the first round, and then everyone around you goes. And if you have questions that were sparked up by someone else speaking, you now have the opportunity to go again. I think it's perfect.
I mean, I also like this because I hope it helps us be better engaged with each other, to be paying attention for those things that like, oh, they're asking something and I don't understand it, so I'm going to make notes, I'm going to write it down so that when it's my turn again, I'm going to bring that out.
And then you mentioned you also agree with point 1, which was supporting the mayor facilitating us with
I
more of
do
an iron
agree with
fist.
that. Yeah,
Iron gavel.
yeah, I think we're all feeling good about that. I hope we're all feeling good about that.
Well, I would also like to say, I would like to have the mayor keep public testimony on topic and not rude. And to the extent that anyone is impugning the motives of council members or accusing them of things, I would like them to be gavelled down and asked to leave the podium, because
I don't think we can do that.
I don't think that's helpful.
Can we
I don't
actually
think
hold
we can
that
do
particular topic until we get to public input? Because it's an interesting point, but
I know, and there are legal issues. I'm just saying, I personally don't want to be dealing with that stuff. I want to get to number 4 after it shortly, so.
Okay. Anyone else on number 1?
Did we want to talk about council reports as part of number 1? Because I think that does go into norms. And
It does, what is it we're expected to talk about? Yeah.
Do you want to start us off, Councilor Giannola?
I don't know. I'm still learning what is appropriate for council reports. I mean, I sort of try to use it to report out things that are relevant from my boards and commissions, or some of the committee, regional committee meetings that I attend, if any. Some folks use it as announcing public events. I mean, I think all these things are appropriate. I think, Mayor Pro Tem, you've got the longest experience.
Yeah, I would suggest that we think about what other counselors need to know and share that. The public events are, the city cover, if somehow the city missed it, and the city manager's update sometimes is those public announcements. But if somehow, that got missed, but things that that each one of us needs to know, like this happened at CML to a limited extent. And, I've gone way too long on some of the things that accumulated. But I think if you think of something that it would be prudent for other counselors to know for decision-making, or, the subcommittee, it's something that that's the time for the public to see us sharing information, because that's when we can share information. So maybe that helps.
Yeah, and I think the concept of new ideas that we have in this meeting is also part of that, because it might be, hey, I've got this thing I'm thinking about, can we bring it up during another? I think you do this a lot, Councilor Jensen, where you say, there's a ballot initiative or something coming up, and we kind of need to be paying attention for it. So it is to that same point that we may need to know, but it may also be to inform the mayor and say, Mayor, can we get this on the agenda for the future?
Councilor Freeland?
If I may, I think seeing, the kind of considerations, that we should have maybe a subcommittee working on this, that the offered norms, I think, are a good start, but there's probably more, and we don't have to fully define them today, like what should reporting look like. So I might suggest that if we do feel like this is valuable, that we take this starting point and we say, why don't we come back at our next counselor reports and talk about it more with, a group of 2 maybe that can bring back a little more fully fleshed out proposal.
I love that.
Yeah, I like that idea.
Well, can we finish the last 2 before we stop talking?
I only meant number 1. I don't mean
Oh,
all.
oh, okay.
I just mean number 1.
Okay.
I'm not saying anymore, so yeah, let's move on to the last 2. And because I think 4 is going to be a longer discussion, let's move to 5 real quick.
Well,
Just kinda-
Longmont has, like we do, 2 public comments on, so they have the very beginning that we have, you know, the first thing. And then they have, if there's a hearing, they have another opportunity on issues on which there's a hearing. And for the first part, they do not allow any speaking from non-Longmont residents. So just, you know, I'm not recommending that, but it's just something to think about. And you mentioned maybe limiting the remarks from people who are not Lafayette residents to 3 minutes and keeping others at 5 minutes. And that's not quite as far as Longmont goes, but might be you know, an intermediate step. So I think most of the people who speak to us fill up the 5 minutes, and they probably, if they were concise, could fit their remarks in the 3 minutes. The other thing we could do is, as Boulder County does, is allow people to consolidate time. So if you have one person who's well-spoken, but a group of 5 people that they're sort of speaking for, and we've seen that in the cemetery issues where we had one person in the family, that they can group their time with some maximum, let's say 10 minutes of the grouping time. But I think there are lots of different ways to do it other than the way we're currently doing it that might, I do think people sometimes drag on the 5 minutes. That isn't to say, you know, what they're saying is not interesting, but it's sort of repeating what they said in the first 3 minutes, you know. So just thoughts about how other entities do it.
I have also seen other councils that will, like, the clerk will make an announcement, 30 seconds remaining. You know, so folks know how much time they have, despite the fact that there is even a clock still also there. That verbal warning sometimes can be another way that kind of.
Councilor Gayes.
I don't want to reduce public comment time from 5 minutes. I do think it's very difficult if you're talking on a difficult topic to cut your time down to 5 minutes. So I've gone to other meetings where I was limited to 2 to 3 minutes, and it's hard to cut it down. So I don't want to limit public participation in any way. Not everyone uses their 5 minutes. If we do want to cut down that time, maybe we can reduce the number of people. So maybe maximum of 40 people can submit for public comment.
We went very tactical very quickly. Just taking a big step back, I think we are very privileged in Lafayette to have a very engaged civil society, right? We have a lot of residents who are very active, very engaged, and fortunately, several of them are in the room with us right now. And I think there is, I'm watching you. I think there is tremendous value in hearing from both the engaged usual suspects, and then if Councilor Gallegos, let me take your point further, from folks who come out once every couple years. I do think, though, that if we're talking about meetings going on very late, routinely, having an hour and a half to 2 hours of public comment routinely, as we do, is a challenge, because we don't start our business meeting until 7:30, 7 o'clock, 7:30, and that has happened many, many times. So I do think this is a component. I think first and foremost for me, I guess I was surprised when I learned that we allow non-Lafayette residents to speak for 5 minutes per. I don't necessarily know that that makes sense, that it serves this Lafayette residents who come out to speak, or that it serves our community, or it serves this council as a business meeting. So I think as a initial thing to get some feedback on, I'm curious what folks think about that. And I see the Mayor Pro Tem's hand.
Well, I think it was pretty obvious during the cemetery public events that there was significant input to the question from people whose address is in Lafayette right now. And I am a little concerned. I do agree that people who are, calling from Arizona to like tell us how to do something when they don't live, when they don't have a former connection. So it's a little difficult to say resident versus non-resident if they have something that we need to hear and they just moved to Broomfield. So I don't know, I just wanted to throw that out because it might be a little too underworked out.
Well,
Like if they
and
can say.
they might have a business here, they might have children who go to school and the school's here. And so even if they don't live here, they are connected here. And so as I'm thinking about this out loud, there really is a distinction between some random person in Florida who just, wants to engage with us versus somebody who has a connection to our community in some way.
And I'm sorry if I wasn't clear. I'm not saying we disallow them. I'm saying that we prioritize the time for people who live in Lafayette. I take your point, the people who have a connection to the community. But to Councilor Gallegos' point a moment ago in terms of, I know you kind of invented a number of 40. 40 people times 5 minutes is over 3 hours, which is untenable for an effective meeting. And I agree with you that most people don't speak for the full 5 minutes. So I do think it's a conversation worth having. I would very much prefer us not to adjust Lafayette resident speaking time, but I'm having a hard time understanding why we don't constrain non-Lafayette residents' time to some degree. Please.
So I did pick a random number. I did not do the math in my head,
It's
first
okay.
of all. The other thing I wanted to mention is sometimes we have people come and speak about a proclamation who may not be a resident, but may be connected to a specific cause. So maybe they have a business here, or maybe they just have a strong connection. So I wouldn't want to limit their ability to speak about that proclamation, just because they don't live here.
Councilor Jensen's point about folks who have a business here but don't live here, and I think to even a greater extent, people who work in Lafayette but don't live in Lafayette, maybe still deserve a voice. And I think, I don't think we're taking off the table. We're not looking at the Longmont, if that's actually, they don't allow non-Longmont residents to comment during public comment. I'm a little bit surprised if that's true, but I think we're not looking at
I'm telling you,
that.
it's true. It's called Public Invited to be Heard, and it's only Longmont residents.
I did have a conversation with the mayor, and she said that they have to come later.
Yeah, they come in the public hearing part. But if there's no public hearing on the thing that you're there to talk about, there isn't a place.
That's not what I understood, but I could have been.
I've done it at least 5 times.
Okay.
So, because I don't live in Longmont, right? So I've been there, and which means you're there at the 10 o'clock hour, or whatever, when they finally get to the public hearing.
Does that mean you're speaking about something that you care about during a hearing that doesn't have to do with that certain item?
No, so they do the public invited to be heard, which is open comments about anything, just like ours. And then if they have an issue that they are voting on and they have a public hearing, you can speak in the public hearing component of that issue, and it's about that item that you care about.
Go ahead.
No, please. I would love to hear that. So a couple months ago when I handed out a little worksheet, I did a cursory research on a dozen municipalities in our region, and we have by far the longest public comment of any municipality in the region other than Superior, which is cool and also impacts what we're talking about this evening. And I think we should kind of grapple with that. And I respectfully reject the characterization that reducing someone's speaking time from 5 minutes to 3 minutes is depriving them of the ability to be heard. I don't think that's fair. Otherwise, we would be saying that Thornton and North Glen and Brighton, et cetera, are depriving their residents of the ability to be heard, which I just don't think is fair.
So then why not make it 15 minutes?
I mean, we can set some limits, some reasonable limits, and I feel like 5 minutes is a reasonable limit. Most people don't use their 5 minutes. We have the folks who tend to use their 5 minutes tend to come up with a written statement. They go through it, and then they have like 10 seconds left because they've written out a 5-minute statement, and then they say, whatever's on the top of their head beyond that. It's not like someone's up there and they're just playing the Star Spangled Banner for 5 minutes. They're not just using the time to fill the time.
It has happened.
And
I mean, not playing the Star Spangled Banner, but just.
Please, Councilor Fredlin.
So two things. I think the problem lies in 5 minutes for 100 people that come here just doesn't work. We need some sort of boundary that exists if there are a huge amount of people. So to me, the total limit idea of however long it is, you know, maybe we adjust, if there's enough people, it goes from 5 minutes to 3 minutes for everyone because we have to fit into this window that we need so that we don't end at 11. To me, that makes a lot of sense, something that I could be supportive of. Also, given the public comment that we've had recently, I think this is a terrible time for us to consider this. And so, to me, I think on its face, conceptually, it makes a lot of sense to me. Realistically, and with what we're dealing with right now and the folks that have been coming to us, I think this is one that maybe we should hold off on making a decision on, or making a, you know, additional kind of detail on until we see how the others work, right? If we've solved our problem, then maybe, you know, we're in a different place. But I think just right now, especially with the land use code coming up, where that's going to be an important opportunity for our residents to come and talk to us, I just think the time is not right for this one.
I think that's a good point, David. But I have seen, just FYI, when, especially in the last days of the legislative session, when everything's really, you know, back to back and packed, what the legislature does is say, okay, we have an hour and a half to give to this topic. We have 50 people signed up. That means each person gets 3 minutes or whatever it is. And that could be one way we do it every meeting, which is we figure out how much time we have for that topic and divide it by the number of people signed up, and then that's what you get.
I worry about that because now this is where you have 4 people signed up and now we have 15-minute speakers. Don't think it's likely to happen.
Well, there
But it
would be a cap.
may be that we have 60 people lined up and now each person gets 1 minute. And that is challenging.
Mayor Pro Tem?
So as Councilor Jensen mentioned, you get 3 minutes. I think we're infringing upon people's right to petition their leaders. Like, that's why we're here. One of the reasons we're here, so they can state their piece. If we limit it to 3 minutes, I think you should be able to get, you know, what you need to say out in 3 minutes, but I don't like the idea of limiting the total time. And if we communicate effectively, we don't necessarily have 100 people who need to say what they need to say. And we can encourage people to consolidate what they have to say. But I don't like the idea of limiting public input, but total time, but the 3 minute time. And I think a lot of our time issues are not, some of them are with public input, but we have a lot of process issues that have us run too long in our business meetings.
I mean, didn't we receive some public analysis of this issue where they said, oh, if you were to change from 5 minutes to 3 minutes, it was going to save you an average of like 8 minutes maybe?
I found that analysis made the case for us to move from 5 minutes to 3 minutes because it would make no impact.
Oh, but see, I disagree. I think it would make a significant impact. It doesn't change the, are you saying, so then we should, based on that analysis, move to 3 minutes?
Yeah.
Except it makes an impact for those folks, those members of the public who want to speak for 5 minutes. But it
removes-
doesn't make an impact on the length of our meeting.
Not no impact. It was like, I think if I recall, it was like between 20 and 50 minutes per meeting, depending on, she went back and looked at the meetings we've had and.
I thought it was 8 minutes. 8 minutes was the number that, so that if,
Depends on the meeting.
on average, it was 8 minutes.
On average. So there are certainly some that are on the higher end that would impact.
But, you know, I don't know. I'm personally not in favor of going to 3 minutes at this time.
Stipulating your earlier point about the unique time that we're having this conversation, I think I first mentioned this back in March or April. If I had my druthers, it would be 4 minutes for Lafayette residents, and we would be pretty liberal with how we interpreted Lafayette resident to include a business owner or a family member who had a spouse buried in the cemetery, and it would be 2 minutes for non-residents, if I had my druthers. Because I frankly don't think people calling in from Australia should get to speak as long as people who live here and pay taxes and
I
deal
think
with it in
that's
our community.
interesting. I mean, yeah.
I don't think we're getting anywhere near
We're not.
consensus. But I like the ideas, and I like the discussion, and maybe this is something we circle back on later. Number 5, moving proclamations to the consent agenda or establish a norm to keep remarks on proclamations relatively brief. I like the second here. I love proclamations being read. I don't like them being on the consent agenda because we typically don't read through things on our consent agenda. And I really like proclamations to be read and to be celebrated and to be voted on individually. What I will say is keeping remarks brief, I think, is something we should all just consider going forward, right? The reminder I always get, especially through my day job, is the proclamation itself is the statement. When we vote on it and we pass it, that's the statement we're making, so we can always keep the remarks after. There's always going to be exceptions to that rule. There's going to be proclamations we're maybe going to want to talk about, but for me, this one is pretty straightforward. Just keep remarks brief and keep them on the regular agenda.
Sounds good.
I fully agree, and I think some of the things we do proclamations on, we don't really do anything else. You know, we're just reading the proclamation to draw attention to something that we want the public to know about. And if we put them in the consent agenda and we never read that, I feel like it seems like why bother?
Yeah.
And I think our comments have been relatively brief on proclamations, and so just keep it in mind to continue. I don't think we've gone on it. I don't think that's where our problem lies.
I have.
I think it has been a problem, but only when we have like 4 or 5 proclamations, it just starts to add up because of every proclamation, but I agree.
Sounds good to me.
Great. Anything else on just this whole thing? Any other thoughts?
Thanks for the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Do we want to create a subcommittee on the working norms, or do we feel like that's necessary?
Well, can we just get staff to do a draft of what we've done tonight and give it back to us, and then we can look at it and see if we need further work after we look at it?
Yeah, to Mayor Tapia Vega's point, we're not going to be reinventing the wheel, so we can certainly pull different examples as well. I'm sure there's items that we haven't thought of and write a draft. And because, you know, a lot of this would need to be either incorporated into your handbook or a sort of a separate adopted document. What I'm hearing is because we do have the land use code on July 7th, which is your next formal meeting, maybe we could try a few items that don't require the updates, like holding the comments. We can try putting some times maybe internally and see how that feels or works, and just kind of iterate over the next several months probably on all of these.
Yeah, and I was specifically talking about the number 1 on slide 2,
Yep.
kind of the working norm. So yes, there are action items from all this that I'm sure staff will be working diligently to get to us, but the working norms, I mean, certainly you could pull those from us, but quite frankly, I don't know. I mean, there are working norms. So if we want to build them, we should build them, in my opinion, and not ask staff to go and find, I mean, staff could certainly go find examples, we could react to them. That is another way that we could do it as well. But we could also propose them, as we've had 3 proposed already, and add to
So
them.
you're talking about things we didn't, excuse me for interrupting, we
No, please.
didn't discuss tonight, like other working norms. I
Correct.
saw this as codifying what we discussed tonight. You're seeing it as adding others that we didn't talk about.
One of the things in here that we discussed was the working norms, like during our meeting, the norms that we agree to, right? And so to me, I don't think we got to a final state of what those should be. These different actions that we talked about, I think we did get to good consensus on which ones we want to move forward and which we don't. So I'm not saying add more to this action list or whatever we want to call it. I'm more saying that working norm list that Council Bollier started us on, do we want to continue, or are we happy with those 3, I guess? Or do we want to add more and empower 2 people to go and do that work? Does that answer your question? Does that make sense?
I'm still a little confused.
I agree that there might be norms that we aren't aware of and that might be valuable. And so I think it could be useful for, you know, the exercise for staff might be, can you try to find some of these from other municipalities, compile them and give them to the subcommittee, who then says, okay, here's the sort of, let's see what's common and what makes sense, what we've already talked about, or what we think, we would agree with, and that subcommittee then proposes, here's a proposed set of working norms, what does everyone think?
So I went to a meeting of another elected body this week where one member of the body spent about 5 to 6 minutes insulting the chair. So a norm that says, don't do that, right? That kind of thing, is that what you're talking about?
Potentially,
Yep.
yeah, keep comments on topic.
Yeah.
Maybe is the norm would be.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of different kind of buckets that these norms could fit in, and respect and just treating each other is one of them, and it's kind of one of the main themes along all the working norms that I've seen from council. I love the idea of a subcommittee. I love the idea of looking at the working norms that other municipalities have and just seeing what we can implement, what we like, what we don't like. With that being said, if a subcommittee were to be established, is there anyone who would be willing or would want to be part of it?
Happy to do it.
Councilor Gianella?
I thought we already had a subcommittee.
For this, that's
For
a
the
separate
norms.
subcommittee.
I might, if I may, I might nominate our Mayor Pro Tem, considering you have so much experience on this council, you've seen what's worked well, what maybe has worked not as well. It might be a really valuable perspective to bring this conversation, if you'd be willing to accept
Sure.
my nomination.
Yes, except if I'm asked.
Thank you.
Great, so I think that settles it. I'll look forward to it. Great, before I move us on here, any final thoughts on any of this?
So we have Councilor Gianola and Mayor Pro Tem Barnes as the subcommittee. Okay.
And I think we'll just make that official at some point at a future meeting like we did with the past subcommittee. Great, fantastic. I appreciate both of you taking that on. And I appreciate the two counselors who did this presentation for us. Thank you for all the work and thank you for presenting tonight.
Pleasure. Thank you to the city manager as well for making this happen.
Great, well, the only agenda item left tonight is new ideas. I didn't hear anything this week. I haven't heard anything from staff that was brought to them, so I'll just open it up to the room, but I don't know. Councilor Giannola? Great, not seeing anything. Okay, well, thank you all so much.
Wait, I do have something. We have talked before when we had some kids speak to us about the issue of, vaping and the purchase,
Tobacco retail
licensing of
license.
vaping, and I want us to make sure we keep that. I met this week with somebody from Philip Morris who said they actually support it, and I was surprised about that. And also gave me some ideas about further things we could do. Like, we have vape shops right next to schools. And so our land use code, whether we want to consider, any restrictions that on vape shops and their proximity to schools. There's a lot of things I hadn't thought about, but I want to make sure that doesn't get lost somewhere on the agenda.
I would recommend you send those recommendations over to staff, but from my understanding, that's already on the calendar. It's not anytime, at least not immediate,
Trying to get
but
through a few other
trying to
things,
get through a
yeah.
few other things for it.
But
I
it
know
is
it's
on
on
our
the
radar.
calendar.
I did meet with the gentleman that spoke to you all, Nick Torres, I believe, with the Lung Cancer Society. So yeah, yep, we have the information, we just need the capacity.
And Mayor, I would just say for the rest of council's benefit, the amount of work, I'm sure many of you are tracking this, but the amount of work staff has been putting in on the cemetery issue is unreal. So just kudos to staff for all their work on this.
Great, okay. Thank you all so much. Have a great night.